A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. It was a quiet evening when I sat down at my kitchen table, the faint smell of roasted vegetables still clinging to the air, a comforting reminder of the dinner I had enjoyed alone after a long day. I was scrolling through my phone when a message from an acquaintance, Anna, popped up, asking if she could come over for a casual get-together. My fingers hesitated over the screen, thoughts racing back to a party last month where Anna, with her bright smile and bubbly personality, made a bombastic introduction that was quickly overshadowed by her confession. She referred to herself as a total klepto. At the time, I had chuckled along with the other guests, brushing it off as a quirky exaggeration, but her subsequent actions raised hair on my neck. I watched, uneasy, as she slipped a bottle of wine into her bag and, just before leaving, rifled through my collection of vintage postcards while distracted by conversation. I knew I should have said something then. It would have been a golden opportunity for a teachable moment, but the laughter of friends masked my instincts as I let it slide. Now, as I read her message, I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I typed a hesitant response, explaining that I had plans for the weekend and wouldn't be able to host her. Each word felt like a half-truth, a feeble wall I was trying to erect against an uninvited chaos. After sending it, I sank into an uneasy silence, replaying the moment she had look of glee when she thought no one was watching, a sort of childlike delight in taking things that weren't hers. The truth was, I didn't want that kind of energy in my home, a space I had worked hard to make a sanctuary. I loved the little treasures I had collected over the years, the mismatched teacups, the faded photographs, and the mere idea of them being subject to her klepto nature made me shudder. Days passed after my refusal, but the unease lingered like an unwelcoming guest. Our mutual friends began to ask about my decision. They wanted to know why I hadn't invited Anna, often couching their questions in a concern that felt almost mocking, as if I were the unreasonable one who had denied a friend simple hospitality. "It's just a joke, you know?" one of them remarked, laughter dancing at the edges of his voice as we stood by a fruity punch bowl. "You can't take it seriously." But I couldn't shake off the feeling. I started to wonder if I was being a bit too harsh, a bit too closed off, yet I felt the sting of their laughter in a way that didn't match my situation. Then came a text I hadn't anticipated. Anna reached out to me again, this time apologizing for her past behavior and inviting me to discuss it over coffee. A part of me wanted to engage, to hear her thoughts and perhaps offer her the understanding I had assumed she lacked. Yet another part remained on guard, caution spilling into the forefront of my mind, warning me of potential manipulation. I chose ambiguity, suggesting that we meet in a public space, something casual, allowing me to maintain the physical distance my heart craved. When the day came, we met in a quaint little cafe, the air thick with the smell of freshly baked pastries. Anna walked in, her demeanor had shifted, the confidence seemed tempered by uncertainty, her usual flamboyance stripped down to a fragile humility. She ordered a latte, and as our small talk veered into deeper waters, I found myself listening intently, her eyes pleading for comprehension, her remorse tinged with vulnerability. She spoke of her addiction, her battles with impulse control, her admission that the label klepto was more of a coping mechanism than a joke. I felt my own walls begin to crack, an understanding blossoming within the fissures of my guarded heart. It became evident that her light-hearted banter often masked a turbulent history, a story that I hadn't anticipated digging beneath the surface. I left that meeting not with a resolution but with a renewed sense of compassion towards someone I had judged too quickly. Maybe I wasn't the asshole after all, but perhaps I was merely wrapped in the confines of my own fears. Eventually, as I navigated my way through my own thoughts, I decided to reach out again. I recorded a message for Anna, saying I'd like to try again, inviting her for a small gathering with a few close friends. It felt right, a balance of caution and empathy, a tentative step toward bridging the space I had drawn between us. Several weeks later, I would look back at that moment of choosing to create a connection rather than a rift. I realized something profound about people. We are all carrying unseeable burdens, and sometimes, understanding is the most potent remedy we can offer. Update: a few months have passed since our reconnection, and Anna has slowly proven herself to be a dear friend, one who respects my space and has taken steps toward managing her impulses. She even surprised me at my birthday party with a thoughtful, hand-picked gift from my favorite bookstore, something I never would have thought possible when the conversation first unfolded in that cafe. As it turns out, both our experiences shaped a new port of calm in the stormy seas of uncertainty. It had reminded me that sometimes the most unsettling moments can lead to the strongest of bonds. As I reflect on the months that have passed since that pivotal decision, I can't help but marvel at how far Anna and I have come. There was a time when the thought of letting her into my life again felt risky, as if I were teetering on the edge of a cliff. It was easy to envision scenarios where her past tendencies would rear their heads, leading to a cascade of mistrust and awkward moments. However, I've come to understand that letting her in required a vulnerability I hadn't expected to offer, not just to her, but to myself. With each casual meeting, be it over coffee at our favorite little cafe or an impromptu movie night at my place, I noticed the subtle shifts. In our conversations, the laughter now echoed with a reserved familiarity rather than tension and caution. Anna sincerely worked on herself, eagerly sharing her progress and the strategies she was implementing to curb her impulses. Each time she showed up with a new accomplishment or insight, my heart melted just a bit more, swelling with awe for her courage and determination to change. One evening, as we curled up on my couch with blankets piled high and an array of snacks scattered around like a makeshift feast, our laughter filled the room, mingling seamlessly with the soft glow of the lamp casting golden shadows on the walls. It felt like home in a way I had nearly forgotten, a sanctuary where two people could be honest about their flaws without fear of judgment. I remember teasing her about her initial tendency to swipe something, a fine-looking postcard or a quirky pen, when she got overly excited. She playfully rolled her eyes, recounting a story about a time she had unintentionally taken an unusual clay figurine from a friend's house, only to return it a few days later, embarrassed and ashamed. We both laughed, and it struck me how that shared moment of vulnerability forged an even stronger connection. Her self-awareness illuminated a warmth in my heart. It was during one of those cozy evenings that I proposed we visit her old neighborhood, the neighborhood she had grown up in, just to see how things had changed. To my surprise, she agreed. As we strolled through the familiar streets, Anna pointed out buildings and shops, relaying stories from her childhood that were both endearing and bittersweet. There was a sense of nostalgia that enveloped us, and I could feel a deeper understanding blooming between us as we walked under the fluttering leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks. Anna spoke vividly about her dreams and aspirations, the very ones that had often been stifled by her earlier behavior, and in that moment, I glimpsed a new layer of her, the possibility of uncharted horizons, a future reshaped by newfound accountability. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Just last week, while I was out running errands, I received a frantic text from Anna, sharing how she had just been at a local busy store and felt drawn in by the rush of excitement, a familiar tension brewing within her. I could sense her panic through the screen as she admitted having slipped a decorative mug into her bag, her heart racing as she navigated the ethics of her actions in real time. My stomach twisted, I felt a flash of empathy mixed with fear. Part of me worried, was this my fault for encouraging her too much too quickly? Only moments passed before my phone buzzed again, and I read her message thanking me for being there. She confessed that when she reached her car, panic bubbled up inside her, urging her to overcome the old impulse, yet this time she chose differently. She pressed her palm against the mug, emerging as the person she aspired to be, her pulse steadying as she marched back inside to return it. I felt endless pride for her courage, and it served as a pivotal reminder of why I let her back into my life. Now, as I sit here reflecting on our journey, I realize how beautifully intertwined our lives have become. While Anna may carry the label of a total klepto in moments of levity, she is so much more than that one chapter. She is a testament to resilience, transforming an unsettling part of her identity into a space of growth and self-awareness. And who she is now, the person she has become, inspires kindness and connection in ways I genuinely didn't believe possible. Perhaps in forging a connection based on our mutual struggles, we inadvertently carved out a bond that scaffolded our souls in the chaos of living. As I look ahead, I can't help but feel curiosity for what lies down this uncharted path for us. Whatever it may be, together, we are embracing it. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting often on that crisp autumn day when Anna sat across from me in the little cafe, her admission hanging in the air like a caustic perfume. I had braced myself for the storm that conversation could have unleashed, but instead, it had gently nudged open the door to an unexpected friendship. One chilly evening, as golden leaves swirled around outside my window, Anna and I sat curled up in my living room, a stack of books scattered between us, the soft glow of fairy lights illuminating the cozy space. We were laughing about our most recent adventure, her brave decision to swap out her usual baked goods for fruit and nuts at a local market, a small victory in her ongoing journey of self-regulation. Each jest carried the weight of our shared laughter and love, a testament to how far she had come since our initial meeting. I watched her, marveling at the way her eyes sparkled with pride at her choices, something I often found myself nurturing in her as she shared anecdotes about her past mishaps. It was strange to think that just months prior, I had been wary of her presence, needing to protect my own space from the chaos of her admitted kleptomania. Yet here we were, two souls in tandem, navigating the bumps of our own imperfections. In the quiet moments, I could feel vulnerability wrap around us like a warm blanket, stitching together the tearing seams of our uncertainties. We talked about the moments that had defined us, her experiences reflected in mine, and it became clear that both of us had worn masks before finally discovering a safe haven in each other. There were still echoes of the past, rumblings beneath the surface that reminded us of our journeys. Sometimes, I would catch a flicker of darkness clouding her face, a shadow of temptation that whispered if only it could persuade her just once more. But instead of fear, I felt a rush of empathy swell inside me. I had seen her taking strides, how she carried around little reminders of her commitment, like a bracelet that she fidgeted with during tense moments, a grounding anchor amid her chaotic thoughts. These days, her voices of the past had transformed from torturous howls into whispered echoes of encouragement. We had both come to recognize that acceptance doesn't mean surrendering to our flaws, but rather, learning to dance with them amid the music of life, struggling less against the rhythm and finding our own beat. With every passing day, curiosity about our future mingled with uncertainty, a blend of excitement and trepidation that accompanied me whenever I thought of where this connection might lead. We began exploring new hobbies together, pottery classes that left our hands muddied yet creative, bookshop visits where conversations would tumble into the air like soft whispers. Each activity strengthened our bond, and it became increasingly hard to imagine my life without Anna's infectious laughter. One balmy winter evening, as we sat close in front of the flickering fireplace, our shared warmth seemed to wrap around us like the flames dancing in the hearth. Anna turned to me, her voice quiet but steady. "You know, I've learned so much from you, not to be afraid of the messy parts of our lives." I found that I had learned just as much from her, how authentic friendships could coax us out of our hidden corners and inspire bravery where we once only felt fear. It was then I realized what we were building together was not simply companionship, it felt like crafting a safe haven, a gathering point for two afraid hearts trying to rewrite their narratives. Still, as thoughts of what lay ahead lingered in the back of my mind, I understood that even within this sea of calm, the tides could shift with the slightest change. Our bond felt strong, almost etched in stone, yet challenges were part of life's intricate design, woven delicately into each sunset. As I nestled deeper into the warmth of our moments like these, I recognized that every twist in this journey would further color our story, each chapter rich with experience, growth, and perhaps an occasional storm. Yet through the tempest, I felt a newfound certainty that, no matter what, Anna and I were committed to weathering it together, brave enough to embrace whatever was waiting around the corner. The soft hum of the summer air filled my lungs as I leaned back against my old porch swing, the creaking rhythm calming me, but still the unease twisted like a vine in my stomach. I had always considered myself a peacemaker, the kind of person who would rather diffuse a tense situation than throw a match at it, but here I was, grappling with a decision that felt monumental. My best friend Jenna had been meticulously planning a family vacation for months, a week-long getaway to the coast that she'd promised would be filled with laughter, beach bonfires, and endless sunshine. However, the excitement I felt morphed into something sour when, at a recent gathering, Jenna's brother Alex introduced me to his girlfriend, Tara. From the moment we shook hands, I could tell something was off. Tara had a way of smiling that felt forced, as if she were performing for an audience rather than engaging in a genuine interaction. Still, I brushed off my instincts, telling myself I was being overly sensitive. But it didn't take long for her true demeanor to surface. During a casual conversation with a group of friends, I had made a harmless joke about how I would never be brave enough to go bungee jumping, and Tara laughed a little too loudly, before leaning in and saying, "Well, good thing you're already so grounded, there's no chance of you jumping off anything anytime soon." It was meant to be a quip, but something in her tone pierced deeper into me, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I chose to ignore it, hoping it was a one-off incident. However, the comments soon escalated into a series of passive-aggressive jabs aimed at my tastes in music and my professional aspirations, each one wrapped in a layer of mockery that left me feeling increasingly small. I knew Tara was Jenna's brother's girlfriend and that I had to play it cool for the sake of everyone else, but when the day came for the beach trip, I felt a seething ball of anxiety lodged in my throat as memories of Tara's comments replayed like a broken record. When I got the message from Jenna, confirming the details of the trip, it struck my mind like a hammer. "You excited for family time?" It read, and my heart sank. How could I possibly enjoy a week in close quarters with someone who belittled me at every turn? Thoughts raced through my head, It seemed so trivial on the surface, but I had always been taught that you should trust your gut, no matter how small the issue may seem. Should I express my concerns, tell her what her brother's girlfriend had done to me? Or would it make me seem overdramatic, an asshole ruining a family vacation? I wrestled with myself throughout the night, tossing and turning until morning brought clarity, not resolution, but clarity. I had to make a choice, either go and endure the taunts or cut my losses and cancel my reservation, which felt like a betrayal against Jenna, who had so eagerly planned this trip. As the sun rose, I decided that I wouldn't attend this trip. I thought about how I deserved to be treated better, that allowing Tara to ruin something I had looked forward to would only deepen my frustration. I sent Jenna a calm and thoughtful message, explaining my feelings and why I felt I could not join them this time around. I poured my heart into those words, conveying that it wasn't her fault, and nothing to do with the family. It was about wanting to protect my own peace. The response came quickly, and my stomach churned as I watched the 3 little bubbles appear and disappear, Jenna typing and erasing, typing again. Finally, her message arrived, "I'm sorry. I had no idea. Do you want to talk about it?" In that moment, a wave of relief washed over me. I had chosen the right path. We talked later that evening, and I explained my experiences with Tara. Jenna listened patiently, her understanding soothing the wounds of doubt I had bandaged throughout the day. She expressed her apologies for me feeling uncomfortable, assuring me that she would discuss it with Alex, but also emphasized that she knew how hard it was to navigate complicated relationships within families. As we talked, something began to shift in my perspective. Perhaps Jenna wouldn't harbor resentment towards my decision after all, and with that thought came a mix of gratitude and sadness. It felt liberating in a way I hadn't anticipated. We ended our conversation with a casual promise to hang out soon, just the 2 of us. A few days later, I received a call from Jenna. "You won't believe this," she began with a laugh. After talking to Alex about Tara, he broke up with her. Apparently, she had been treating him that way too. Her voice cracked with laughter, but it wasn't malicious. It was clear Jenna found humor in the situation and validation in my choice to step away. As I hung up, I realized that I hadn't been the asshole I had feared becoming. I had done something brave, established boundaries. Sure, not everyone would understand my decision to skip the trip, but it felt undeniably right. I couldn't help but reflect on how sometimes prioritizing your own well-being could lead to a happier outcome than you'd ever expected, and as I settled back into my swing, the summer air cradled me like an embrace, reminding me that I had made the right choice. My story echoed in the quiet of my thoughts. Speaking up was an act of self-love. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the sky, I let the stillness of the evening wrap around me like a comforting blanket. The tension from earlier in the week, those heated moments filled with uncertainty and anxiety, slowly began to dissolve into a mere backdrop of distant anxiety, allowing for introspection to take center stage. It was strange how life could shift so abruptly. One moment I was gearing up for what I thought would be a joyful family vacation with friends, and the next, I was choosing personal boundaries over chaotic gatherings that had become tinged with past grievances. I had known Sarah and her family for years. We shared countless gatherings, laughter-filled dinners, and holiday celebrations. Their home was a second family to me, yet the arrival of Jake's girlfriend, Mia, had changed the atmosphere entirely. She was charming enough to sweep her way into their circles, but beneath that veneer, I had sensed a thickness, a harshness I couldn't quite grasp until she unleashed her venomous remarks directly at me. The way she laughed, but not with me, always at my expense, fueling my insecurities to a raging fire, igniting a storm of emotions I felt powerless against. The night I confronted her, my nerves buzzed with anxiety, but a flicker of determination pushed me through. I stood up for myself, only to be met with condescension and mockery, a cacophony that echoed in the corners of my mind long after the conversation ended. The vacation had felt like an ultimatum. Either I pressured myself to endure another week of harassment disguised as humor, or I chose to walk away. But it was more than just a stressful week away. It was a reflection of a greater truth I'd been unwilling to acknowledge until now. I had convinced myself that I was hypersensitive, that maybe my reactions stemmed from personal insecurities rather than a genuine threat to my emotional well-being, but with every snide remark I recalled, I learned that my discomfort was valid. I deserved peace. Settling into my porch swing, the gentle creaking brought my mind back to the fleeting moments of boldness I'd felt when I finally said no. It felt as if a weight had lifted, and I marveled at the idea that sometimes, brave actions can spur waves of change we never expected. The afternoon breeze tangled playfully with my hair, carrying the scent of blooming flowers, and I grinned slightly, realizing that the warmth didn't just come from the setting sun but also from within my heart, a sense of freedom. I was finally free from the expectation that dictated how I should feel or act around people who did not respect me. The sun disappeared, casting the world into a soft twilight, and I settled into the stillness, letting the sounds of the night surround me. A distant thunder roll reminded me that storms could come, whether they were weather-related or within our relationships, and I realized something deeper, that it was okay to sometimes choose the calm solitude over the chaos, even if it meant stepping away from the people I loved. Before I knew it, my mind wandered to the possibility of how Sarah might react. She was the glue of our group, and I worried she would be disappointed or upset that I was skipping out. But what I knew with certainty was that I had put myself first, and for once, the discomfort of saying no transformed into the relief of being true to whom I had become. The night offered a sense of resolution, wrapping me in an almost dreamlike embrace, begging me to turn inward and reflect. I settled deeper into the swing, feeling the rhythm of life around me lull my thoughts into a soft hum. Perhaps tomorrow would bring new revelations and a deeper understanding of how to navigate relationships moving forward. As sleep beckoned, I found solace in the quiet and the decision I had made, a reminder that self-love doesn't just mean indulging in things that make you happy but also means having the courage to say enough is enough. And with that comforting thought in my mind, cradled by the feathery embrace of the summer night, I surrendered to the soft whisper of sleep. The days that followed were a gentle blur, a harmonious blend of quiet moments and the mundane rhythm of daily life. It was remarkable how, with my newfound clarity, even the simplest of routines felt more vibrant. My morning coffee tasted richer, the sunlight pouring through the window seemed warmer, and even my interactions with friends became more fulfilling. I reveled in this feeling, sinking deeper into the comfort of my own company, though a slight twinge of worry tugged at the edges of my contentment. Sure, I had been resolute in my decision to skip the family vacation, but there was a lingering thought that perhaps my friend had seen it as a betrayal rather than a necessary boundary. I could only imagine the conversations that buzzed among her family. They were close-knit, and I knew my choice wouldn't have gone unspoken. As the end of the week approached, I received a message from my friend, a simple "Hey, can we talk?" And I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. It felt as if the air had thickened, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I hesitated, finger hovering over the screen as I contemplated my next move. What could she want to discuss? Would she confront me about my decision, or would she still be understanding? I took a deep breath, recalling the peace of that summer night, reminding myself that I was not only allowed to advocate for my own well-being but that I should cherish my needs in the same way I cherished my friendships. When we finally met up at our usual cafe, the one with the checkered tablecloths that always felt homey despite how tucked away it was from the bustling main street, my heart raced. She was already seated, her brow furrowed as she fiddled with the napkin, and I felt a rush of regret wash over me at the sight of her distress. I slid into the seat across from her, searching her eyes for clues, wanting nothing more than to dissolve the tension that lined the air between us. "Hey," she started, her voice soft yet laced with unease. "I've heard some things." And just like that, I felt my heartbeat quicken. She launched into the conversation, revealing whispers of concern from her family, comments that I was being unreasonable or selfish. Deep down, I expected this kind of fallout. It was a reflection of how affectionately they all seemed to regard one another, but I also found a flicker of disappointment creeping in as she relayed their sentiments. "I just wish you could have talked it out with us, you know? I thought we were on the same team," she murmured, her eyes dim reflecting confusion. In that moment, I felt a rush of emotions surge through me, anger, guilt, and a tinge of sadness. I wanted to lash out, to explain how her brother's girlfriend's behavior had threatened my peace, that my choice wasn't born of spite but of necessity. Yet her hurt was palpable, and I could sense my need to defend myself was clashing with the urge to reassure her. "I understand how it might seem," I began slowly, choosing my words with care. "But I had to protect myself. The way she treated me, it wasn't right. I tried to reach out to you, but every time I did, it felt like there was more tension, and I truly did fear what being around her would mean for me." For a moment, silence fell between us. I watched her shoulders relax slightly as she processed my words, and although I wished desperately for a way to bridge the gap that had formed, I held my breath, hoping that understanding would find its way between us. Eventually, she lifted her gaze, and there was a soft vulnerability in her expression. "I wish you had just told me everything sooner," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "None of us are perfect, and I don't regret wanting to include you. I guess it just hurt hearing you weren't coming along. I'm always grateful for friendships," I thought as we talked, pained in the moment yet intertwined in a kind of healing I hadn't expected. While she didn't outright apologize for her family's words, nor could I expect her to, we both recognized a pathway back to each other, one paved with honesty and understanding. As we navigated through our feelings and learned how to express our vulnerability, I felt the weight begin to lift from my chest, replaced by the flicker of something warm and familiar. We spent the rest of that afternoon laughing over shared memories and even exchanging stories about our most awkward moments. By the time we parted, the tension had dissipated, and we were back on that familiar wavelength, the bond more profound for having tested its limits. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, like returning home after a long journey, and in my heart, I acknowledged that friendships, like life, would have their peaks and valleys. Weeks later, I received a postcard from their trip. There was my friend's cheerful handwriting, accompanied by a sweet note about the beach days and messy adventures, all punctuated by light-hearted illustrations. As I hung it up on my fridge, right next to the one from my own getaway, I realized the power of choice was a beacon for light in my life. It reminded me that standing up for my well-being didn't just protect me, it encouraged a space for openness and connection. The quiet comfort of being true to myself weaved itself into the friendships I cherished. In the larger narrative of my life, I learned that sometimes the ripples of a choice echo much longer than the initial impact, and the often scarier path of honesty and vulnerability not only nourishes my soul but also elevates the relationships I hold dear. I settled back into my swing one evening as summer whispered its last goodbyes, feeling eternally grateful for the lessons learned, the connections healed, and the quiet strength that grew in the acceptance of my own worth. As I closed my eyes that evening, lulled once more by the familiar sounds of dusk, I realized every step on this journey was but another beautiful stroke on the canvas of my life, colorful, wild, and utterly mine to shape. I've often pondered the small moments that diverge and spiral into something entirely unexpected, and my life took one of those turns the day I decided to lie about my age. I was just 16, a kid on the precipice of adulthood, yearning for independence but too trapped under the weight of my parental expectations to carve my own path. When I spotted that quaint little apartment listed online, affordable, with sunlight streaming through each window and an inviting balcony overlooking a park, I felt an electric thrill rush through me. For years, I had dreamt of escaping my suffocating home life, the thought of living alone was intoxicating. So, in a reckless rush, I crafted a new identity, boldly declaring myself 21, convinced that one tiny lie was harmless. Somehow, the landlord took my fabricated story at face value, signing the lease without a second glance. The first night in that empty apartment was exhilarating. I remember sinking into the unfamiliar couch with a glass of cheap wine, my heart racing with the thrill of my newfound freedom. Yet, as time passed, I realized I had unwittingly opened a Pandora's box. Lying about my age became a habit, a reckless thread that began to weave itself through the very fabric of my life. I found myself straddling two worlds, the carefree existence of a college student and the terrifying reality of still being a teenager. Every interaction with my neighbors and new friends came laced with the tension of my deception, and my anxiety peaked each time someone asked me to recount a story about my past. I avoided anything that might have exposed my truth, replying with vague memories crafted from bits and pieces of friends' experiences and the stories I gravitated toward online. I reveled in the freedom but became increasingly engulfed by the guilt of my deceit. My little sanctuary morphed into a gilded cage, and as the months rolled on, I felt the pressure mounting. One evening, I returned home after a long day at my high school, only to find my neighbor Leah waiting for me outside my apartment. Leah was 22, a free spirit with an infectious laughter that echoed through the halls, and somehow, I had allowed myself to get close. She had welcomed me into her circle, and I was terrified of the moment she would discover my truth. Yet that evening, she simply turned to me and asked if I wanted to join her for a dinner with her friends, a casual invitation that filled me with both gratitude and dread. I spent the night dodging questions like they were bullets and laughing a little too hard at jokes that I couldn't fully understand. But underneath the surface, I felt it creeping in, the weight of my deception. I would always be looking over my shoulder, waiting for the inevitable crash when my lies would unravel. The breaking point came on my birthday, which I had kept a secret from everyone. I didn't want to face the shame of revealing my actual age, but I felt so alone as I stared at the clock, watching the hours tick by. Leah and her friends surprised me with a small cake as they ambushed me with a chorus of happy birthday, only I felt shattered inside. That night, I gathered the courage to pull Leah aside, my palms clammy with anxiety. And with my heart racing, I confessed everything, how I had fabricated my age and the spiral of lies that followed. She stared at me in disbelief, her laughter evaporating into silence. I braced myself for rejection, for anger, but instead, she paused, her expression softening as she took a deep breath. "You're still you, with or without your fibs," she said quietly. "Just be honest from now on." It wasn't a magical resolution, but in that moment, something shifted within me. I realized I needed to take ownership of my truth, as complicated and messy as it was. I began to dismantle the layers of my facade, allowing those around me to see the real me, a confused teenager navigating adulthood. Though it didn't erase the past, I began to mend my relationships, unexpected friendships blossoming from the ashes of my dishonesty. The landlord eventually agreed to let me stay despite learning my true age, seeing the growth within me as I started taking responsibility. Looking back, I realized that snowballing can lead not just to chaos, but to unexpected positivity. I learned that the weight of truth carries its own freedom, and while I never would have chosen that path, it shaped who I am today. Life is not about the perfect facade, it's in the moments of genuine connection and vulnerability. And to the world, I now stand as I am, an imperfect being with tales of mistakes and lessons that remind me to embrace authenticity. Update: a year has passed since the confessional night, and I'm now navigating college, still in that same apartment. Leah and I have formed a close friendship, not based on my pretensions, but on real shared experiences, going to flea markets and sipping lattes while dissecting life's absurdities. I still catch myself looking back at that version of me, aware of how far I've come. Recently, I even wrote a letter to the landlord expressing my gratitude for believing in me during a time when I didn't believe in myself. He wrote back, reminding me that we all make mistakes and grow from them. Life is a winding journey, and I'm thankful for every twist and turn that brought me to now. But the journey hasn't always felt like smooth sailing. There have been moments, especially in the quiet hours when I reflect on my life, where a shadow of doubt creeps in, wondering if the foundation of my adult life was built on deception. During some of our flea market trips, as I flipped through vintage records and marveled at dusty books, I found myself revisiting that fateful decision at 16. It's funny how small fibs can grow into intricate webs that weave through our lives, binding us to choices we never intended to make. My friends would often laugh it off, joking that my made-up age had granted me an air of sophistication that belied my imagination, but there were times when I felt like I was playing a role in some bizarre play, always afraid someone would pull back the curtain and expose the truth. One evening, while we sat at our usual cafe, the sun dipping below the horizon, I hesitated when a local reporter approached our table, asking about my perspective on young renters in the city. My heart raced as I weighed my options, the words swirling around in my mind. I could easily slip into witty banter, call upon years of life experiences to fill the void, but what would that say about me? Would any of it matter if the foundation of my voice was rotted with untruths? I made a split-second decision, answering in broad strokes, citing statistics from research I'd read rather than lived experiences. The reporter nodded, jotting things down, and as she walked away with a polite smile, I felt a strange combination of relief and guilt wash over me. Life continued to carry on, my friendships deepened, my job stabilized, and sometimes, I even forgot the years that stretched beneath the surface of my fibs. Yet, shadows lingered. I would occasionally receive emails or messages from others who were caught in similar predicaments, drawn to me for advice, wondering how they too might navigate the fragile waters they'd created. While I tried to help them untangle the complexities, the irony of it all was not lost on me, the shared experience of building lies, faced by those who sought honesty from a person who didn't always walk the talk line. I slowly began to realize that many people held their own secrets, some even darker than mine. In a strange turn of events, my past no longer felt like a burden, it transformed into a bridge connecting me to others just trying to figure their way out of the dark. One night, while I was alone at home, I started a blog, a simple space where I could share my truths, my missteps, and the beauty of forging authentic connections, craft a narrative stripped of illusions. As I hit publish for the first time, I felt lighter, as if something oppressive had been lifted. I wrote about that first apartment, my fear-driven motivations, and ultimately, about how I emerged from it, not because of the falsehoods but because of my determination to embrace who I was becoming. A few months into my new online journey, I received a message that sent chills down my spine. It was from the landlord who had once taken a chance on a scared 16-year-old. "I saw your blog," he wrote simply. "It made me proud." Sometimes, we all carry parts of our past that we wish to forget, but they shape us into who we are today. Keep sharing your journey. His words were balm to a part of me that had worried about being known for my lies instead of my growth. I took a deep breath, realizing that despite my past, I was still welcomed into a community shaped by shared vulnerability. Looking back now, I see that each twist and turn, each misstep and misrepresentation, has intricately woven into the fabric of my life's narrative, and I wouldn't change a single thread. Following the landlord's kind words, I decided it was time to be completely honest with my friends, to share the entirety of my story as a gift of authenticity we could all cherish. Sitting down over steaming lattes and sweet pastries, I spilled my heart and all my confessions. Their reactions were loving. Instead of judgment, there was understanding, an acknowledgement that life is chaotic and imperfect and that we all wear masks from time to time, seeking the right moment to slip them off. So, here I am, at a point in my life where I embrace my past as part of my present, where honesty reigns, and where the story continues to evolve. As I write this, I can't help but wonder how many others sit in silence, their truths buried beneath the weight of society's expectations, waiting to break free and carve out their own narratives. I know that courage often looks like vulnerability and that sharing our stories, however messy, can light the way for those feeling lost in the shadows. Who knew a simple lie at 16 would lead to so much growth? Life can indeed be a wondrous, winding journey if we give ourselves the permission to be authentic along the way. As I sit here, reflecting on the winding path that brought me to this moment, I can't help but think of how transformative the last few years have been. The initial thrill of my bold deceit had worn off long ago, replaced by a profound realization that authenticity is far more liberating than pretending to be someone else. In the years since I hastily claimed an age that belonged to someone wiser than me, I've navigated a maze of experiences that have shaped my identity far more than that flimsy lie ever could. I remember the moments of doubt, the nagging voice whispering in my ear, telling me that I wasn't worthy of the life I had built, that one day the truth would emerge and all my hard work would crumble around me like a house of cards. Those fears hung over me, a gray cloud threatening to unleash its downpour at any moment. But with each passing day, I learned more about myself. I discovered my passions, falling in love with the art of photography, a pursuit that allowed me to capture the subtle beauty in the mundane. I can vividly recall that crisp autumn afternoon at the park, the way the leaves danced to the ground, how the golden sunlight fell perfectly on the faces of children laughing. It felt like I was painting images with my camera, narrating the unspoken stories that each frame held. It was through these creative outlets that I found community, fellow artists who, like me, were drawn together by the heartbeats of their passions. There was something raw and profound about those gatherings, sharing pieces of our lives through our art without ever having to hide behind pretense. It felt like I had finally shed the weight of my earlier facade, and instead, I was embraced. For the messy, beautiful reality that I had to offer, the child who had once lied about her age, now standing tall among those who poured their truths into the world. And yet, even in these moments of connection, I still felt the lingering shadows of my past nudging at my consciousness. I anguished over whether I should come clean to my friends about my youthful deception, questioning if such a revelation would shatter the fragile tapestry of trust that I had worked so diligently to weave over the years. Then one evening, as I sat with a friend I had grown particularly close to, Sarah, with her infectious laugh and knack for enlightening conversations, we dove deeper into our respective struggles. I could see the way she battled her own insecurities, the way she compared her journey to others, especially on social media, where the reels of polished lives could leave one feeling utterly inadequate. It struck me then that maybe sharing my story might alleviate some of her burdens and offer her solace in realizing that we are all wrestling with our own narratives, imperfect and beautifully complex. With a trembling heart, I admitted to her my truth, the fib about my age, the fear of being seen as an unworthy child. Instead of recoiling, Sarah leaned in closer, her eyes wide and understanding. To my surprise, she didn't judge. Instead, she shared her own secret, a time when she had pretended to be more established in her career than she truly was, a facade birthed out of fear and desperation. It felt like a domino had fallen, setting off a chain reaction of shared confessions. Topics that previously felt taboo were suddenly free to roam between us. What began as an anxious confession morphed into a profound exchange of intimacy, where we offered pieces of our flawed existence to one another, a dance of vulnerability that, while unnerving, solidified our bond even further. As our conversations layered over one another, painting a richer tapestry of our friendship, I noticed that pain and joy cohabitated in those stories, each lending strength to the other. By the time the sun had set, casting soft shadows across our faces, I felt a wave of liberation wash over me. It was the first time my lie didn't feel like an anchor, but rather, a stepping stone towards deeper truths and connections. Since that night, I've made it a practice to embrace my authenticity, especially when it comes to friendships. My story, while not always boastful or inspiring in the traditional sense, serves as a gentle reminder that life is a collection of experiences, no matter how polished or chaotic they may seem. As I write this, I still find myself in moments of reflection, grappling with the remnants of my past misrepresentation, but instead of shame, I feel a sense of gratitude. It pushed me into the depths of myself, forcing me to confront my fears and rise above them with compassion for both the younger me and the person I am becoming. Truly, our lives are a mosaic of light and shadow, and even the mistakes can guide us to the most radiant pieces of ourselves if we allow them the space to exist. So, as I close this chapter, I can't help but wonder where the next twist in my story will lead me. Perhaps it's in sharing both the highs and lows that we carve out a space for others, the torchbearers of our narratives who may still be waiting to step into their own light, whispers of courage nestled within them, waiting to be set free. I always thought I had a handle on my life, at least until that day in late October when I met Simon. My friends had introduced me to this charming, somewhat eccentric guy during a party at a local bar, and at first, I found his quirks pretty endearing. He had this way of dominating every conversation, offering insights that oscillated between profound and downright weird. It was a smaller gathering, just a handful of us nursing drinks and sharing stories, and when Simon spoke, everyone leaned in. Despite his tendency to ramble about conspiracy theories and existential thoughts, there was something magnetic about him that held my attention. Still, as the night wore on, I sensed a sort of edge to him, a flicker of something unsettling. Not long after that first meeting, we found ourselves reunited at a mutual friend's Halloween party. This time it felt different. I was enveloped by a growing unease as I watched him navigate around the room. His laughter came easily, but I noticed he seemed to concentrate a little too hard on the people he interacted with, as if he were dissecting them instead of simply chatting. He led conversations in odd directions, asking pointed questions that made others uncomfortable, often making observations that seemed oddly personal, despite their casual nature. "You know, you really shouldn't be drinking so much on an empty stomach," he quipped to Jenna, who had been sipping her fifth cocktail. It wasn't just concern, it felt like scrutiny. Over the weeks, my initial curiosity morphed into apprehension. I joked with friends that I was convinced Simon was a spy gathering intel on our little group, but deep down, I had a nagging fear that there was more to him than met the eye. One evening, I found myself sharing a quiet drink with Simon. I thought we were just having an innocent chat, but he began probing deeper, asking about my childhood. It didn't feel innocent at all. He asked about my fears and insecurities as if he were keeping score. Sitting there, I felt vulnerable, like he had unearthed parts of my soul I wasn't ready to share. Days went by, and I noticed little oddities that further twisted the discomfort into an unsettling kind of tension. I discovered he seemed to know far too much about me, and it terrified me how he could recall seemingly trivial details from conversations. It was like I had been unknowingly hypnotized by his charisma or even manipulated. I found myself questioning every interaction, waking up in the middle of the night worrying if I was being watched, and the paranoia finally culminated when I realized someone was outside my apartment late one night. I caught a glimpse of a figure in my peripheral vision, a fleeting shadow that vanished as I turned to confront it. My heart raced, and dread washed over me because that feeling was all too familiar, like a scene from a horror story. My fears bubbled over, and I reached out to my closest friend, Mia. Sitting on her couch, clutching a mug of tea, I exposed my thoughts, spilling out the strange occurrences and Simon's unnerving behavior. She listened patiently before suggesting I confront Simon about how I felt, an idea that sent shivers through me. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood that I couldn't let this anxiety fester. So, I gathered my courage and arranged to meet Simon at a cafe across town, a small place he loved downtown with its mismatched furniture and the smell of freshly baked pastries. It created a stark contrast to the growing storm inside me. When I walked into the cafe, I felt every ounce of anxiety twisting in my stomach. Upon seeing Simon, sitting casually, a faint smile played on his lips. I couldn't help but subconsciously mirror it, yet my fingers were ice cold. I dove straight in, voicing my concerns, trying to keep my tone calm as I explained how his intense interest in my life was making me uncomfortable. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from amusement to a cold, calculated seriousness. He leaned closer, almost whispering, "You think I'm watching you? But I've merely been observing the fascinating patterns in your behavior." That cryptic comment sent a chill down my spine, and I took an involuntary step back. My mind raced as I stumbled to find words, but he continued. "People are so predictable, you see. We're all part of a grander experiment, a social behavior study that I've taken an interest in. Each of you is a case study that could unveil deeper truths about our existence. His confidence was disorienting, and I became acutely aware of the other patrons around us, observing me as if I were a persona in one of his twisted tales. I wanted to laugh it off, to walk away, but the fear was palpable. I excused myself, stepping outside into the brisk autumn air, letting the humidity of our conversation escape with every breath. Somehow, I managed to reach my car in a daze and drove straight to Mia's. I didn't sleep well that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing through the possibilities of what Simon might do next or if he had already manipulated others in similar ways. Just as I felt the weariness seep into my bones, the phone buzzed, an unknown number, but I picked up anyway. "I told you," Simon said, his voice seeping through the receiver with an unyielding calm that made bile rise in my throat. "You're part of the experiment now. Don't worry, you're doing beautifully." I hung up, feeling the life drain from my body. I realized I had to get as far away from Simon as possible, cutting ties with anyone connected to him. I spent a weekend isolating myself, gathering strength, and when Monday rolled around, I put my plan into action. I contacted some of our mutual friends, explained my concerns, and they were surprisingly receptive. It turns out, many felt the same instinctual discomfort around Simon, but no one had voiced it aloud, fearing judgment or ridicule. As we shared experiences, it became clear that Simon wasn't just another quirky guy, he had been a creeping dread in our midst. Eventually, we decided to cut him out of our lives collectively, more empowered and relieved than terrified. Months later, as winter neared, I sat at home one evening, buried in a book, when another unexpected but familiar buzz jolted me. It was Mia, a shared article on a local Reddit thread called "What's the creepiest display of intelligence you've seen by another human?" The title alone made all our previous discussions flood back. In the comments, people recounted their unsettling run-ins with individuals who excelled in manipulation and mind games, a rush of disquiet that reminded me of Simon. As I read through the frightening tales, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him since we distanced ourselves. I found solace in the boundaries I had created and the collective strength of those around me. For the first time in months, I managed to smile, grateful that while some minds can turn dark, together we could harness our vigilance and illuminate the edges of our lives. Life was still unpredictable and frightening at times, but I knew with the right people around me, I could face the shadows lurking in the corners. The house felt lighter that evening as I reflected on my past with Simon, the flickering glow of the candles casting playful shadows on the walls. Each shadow seemed to dance, reminding me that while darkness has its place, so does light. It was quiet in my little home, the only sounds coming from the soft rustle of the wind against the windows. I allowed my thoughts to drift back to the moments I had spent with Simon, the way his laughter used to fill the air, a brilliant counterpoint to the grim tales he told that left a chill in the spine. There was a time when I thought his peculiar interests in the macabre were merely eccentricities, charming quirks in an otherwise ordinary friendship, until they slowly unraveled into something much darker. I remembered the night I had confronted him about my concerns. It was the weekend we attended that horror festival together, a backdrop of laughter mingled with eerie attractions, a perfect blend of delight and dread. Simon had seemed particularly fixated on one exhibit, a grim display showcasing relics of unsolved mysteries and the minds that perpetrated them. Enthralled and oblivious to my discomfort, he stood there, his wide eyes gleaming with a curiosity that pressed against the boundaries of sanity. I could still hear the precise way he had articulated his thoughts that night, how he spoke of the genius behind the chaos, marveling at the way intelligence could twist into something so unpredictable and horrifying. As much as I loved Simon, I felt compelled to separate myself from that energy, from the way he seemed to absorb the darkness, as if it was a fuel he wanted to consume. "We're meant to explore life, not become ensnared in its darkest depths," I had said, and watching the sunlight fade that evening as we parted felt heavy, like ripping apart a thick tapestry we had woven together over years of camaraderie. I wasn't sure if I had saved him from himself or simply turned my back on the friend I remembered. In the months since, life carried on in shades of gray. I reconnected with old friends, leaning into laughter and warmth, rekindling a sense of community I thought I might have lost. Yet, the haunting questions lingered about Simon. Was he okay? Had I been right to walk away? And who was he without me? Each day I navigated these thoughts, trying to reconcile my memories with the resolve I built, telling myself time heals, even from the unseen fractures deep within friendship. One evening, as I thumbed through my usual online haunts, I stumbled upon a recent post that captured my attention, Ask Reddit what's the creepiest display of intelligence you've seen by another human? Without expecting it, Simon's name flashed in my mind like a beacon through the haze of nostalgia. Curiosity spiraled within me, urging me to dig deeper. I clicked on the thread, half hoping to see a glimpse of him, perhaps a casual mention from some connection we had once shared, but it wasn't that simple. The stories people shared ranged from unsettling encounters with exceptional minds to bone-chilling displays of prodigious talent that had warped into something fearsome and complex. But as I scanned through the comments, talents that had emerged from shadows, one stood out to me, the tale of a brilliant mathematician who had calculated, quite accurately, how many people would evade justice. A subtle gnaw of recognition stirred within me. The writer described a friend who once had a penchant for solving puzzles, but his fixation twisted when he began to dabble in darker conspiracy theories, eventually leading him down a path that caused irrevocable harm. My stomach sank as I read on, the details bleeding into memories. I can't shake the feeling that this could easily have been Simon's path, one I had only narrowly avoided. The shadows of our past lurked in the corners of my mind, urging me to stand closer to the light, that fragile flicker of hope I had clung to. My heart raced, caught between hope and dread, and as I read that post, I felt propelled to reach out to him again, to see what he was doing, where his mind wandered now. I imagined sending him a simple message beginning with "Hey, it's been a while." But insecurity wrapped around me. What if he had gone too far into those darknesses? I hesitated as twilight bathed my room in hushed shades, comforted by my newfound clarity but fearful of upturning the peace I had built for myself. I closed my eyes and envisioned the warmth of my reconnecting relationships and the laughter shared around the dinner table, anchoring me against the uncertainty swirling inside. But as moments passed, an undeniable whisper beckoned me. Perhaps it was time to bring the light to him, to reach out and remind both of us we weren't alone in this. I went to bed that night with my heart divided, filling one side with hope and leaving the other, a fragment of fear that maybe, just maybe, I'd let darkness tether itself to me again. After all, we had both grown, and I could only hope the connection I built with my new friends might bridge a gap I once feared would swallow us both. The next morning, I finally resolved to send that message, and as I did, a feeling washed over me, a blend of fear and anticipation, illuminated by the lingering hope that both of us could face our shadows together and emerge unscathed, once more into the light. As I hit send, my heart raced, and I held my breath, waiting for yesterday's to echo with the voice of tomorrow. Could it be that simple? I spent years of my life terrified by Simon's erratic behavior, the way his laughter could turn to rage in an instant, spinning our once gentle friendship into a chaotic whirlpool of fear. Yet now, as the sun streamed through my window and enveloped the room in a warm glow, I wondered if there might still be remnants of the boy I once knew buried beneath layers of fear and mistrust. Moments turned into hours as I went about my day, engaging in the comforting routine that had replaced the chaos of my past. I cooked breakfast, buried myself in work, and spent time with friends who made that weight feel lighter. But in the back of my mind, Simon loomed like a distant storm cloud, reminding me that uncertainty still lingered between us. Just as evening approached and I settled into the comforting embrace of my couch, my phone buzzed, Simon's name lighting up the screen. My breath caught in my throat. As I read his message, I could feel the tight grip of anxiety begin to unravel. "Hey, it's good to hear from you. Been a while, huh? We should catch up." Simple words, yet they felt monumental, as though he was extending a hand across a chasm that had once felt insurmountable. We exchanged a few more messages, each filled with a mix of nostalgia and trepidation as we danced around unspoken issues, hinting at our respective journeys over the years. Simon shared stories of his struggles, gently peeling back layers of the fear I had once associated with him. He had sought help and was working towards healing, but it was his admission of vulnerability that shocked me. He spoke of loneliness and the desire for connection that he had hidden behind his bravado for so long. The shadows we both occupied began to intersect, forming a fragile bridge of understanding between us. The next day, we agreed to meet at our old coffee shop, the very place where our friendship had flourished before the darkness invaded our lives. My stomach twisted into knots as I prepared for our reunion, reminding me of those uncertain days back in high school, filled with unspoken promises and dreadful doubts. When I walked into the shop, a sense of familiarity rushed over me. The air was thick with the scent of brewed coffee and pastries, and I spotted Simon. Sitting at our usual table, his fingers tapping anxiously on the wooden surface. It was almost surreal to see him again, the contours of his face softer now, but his eyes carried that same spark of intensity I remembered. As I approached, I could feel my heart thumping loudly in my chest, a quick reminder of the trepidation still residing within. Our conversation started cautiously, filled with awkward laughter and small talk, each of us carefully navigating the landscape of our shared history. But as we delved deeper, the air shifted. Simon shared his journey, the therapy, the revelations, the regrets, and I shared my own, how the darkness of our past had forced me to redefine my relationships and prioritize my well-being. With each exchanged word, the timing seemed to feel less about reliving the past and more about grasping a future together. There was honesty in our confessions, a mutual understanding that built a resilience we both had lacked for so long. Just as we were beginning to find our footing, however, Simon's expression darkened. A brief silence settled between us, and I could see the pulse of memory crossing his face, a flicker of that old weight surfacing. "I still struggle with some days, you know?" he confessed, his gaze turning away. "There are shadows that feel familiar, and I sometimes forget how to step into the light." The vulnerability in his tone mirrored my own lingering fears, but instead of retreating, something instinctive stirred within me. "We can help each other," I suggested softly, not fully realizing how significant those words would be. "That's what friendship is, right? Clinging to the light even when everything else seems dark?" In that moment, the connection we built felt tangible, almost electric. We mapped out a strategy to support one another, regular meetups, sharing the burdens when either of us appeared to drift back toward the shadows. The coffee shop transformed into a haven of hope as we shared plans and dreams, and for the first time, I felt the familiar tug of an authentic friendship rekindling itself. Days turned into weeks, our meetings grew to be the highlight of our weeks, and little by little, I forgot the fear that once threatened to hold me hostage. We illuminated one another's paths, slowly building a friendship forged in honesty and vulnerability, teaching both of us that our pasts did not define our futures. And while the shadows still loomed faintly at the edges of my consciousness, I knew that they could no longer control me. I glanced at my phone one night while reminiscing and saw countless messages exchanged with Simon. It felt almost strange to think how far we had come from the chaos of last year. I smiled, reflecting on our journey, feeling that tether of fear dissipate, replaced with a shared commitment to shine brightly, together. Sometimes we'd stumble, but we were no longer alone. And that, I realized, was how we would continue to emerge unscathed. As the moonlight streamed through my window, illuminating the edges of my room, a thought settled within me. Perhaps true intelligence isn't merely about what we know, but about the connections we forge and the willingness to embrace vulnerability. I never thought a simple dinner would unravel the delicate web of my family's dynamics, but that's exactly what happened one fateful evening when my mom's boyfriend, Todd, crossed a line I thought was unimaginable. I've always taken pride in being the rational one in the family, calm, collected, and a fierce protector of the boundaries I believed should never be crossed. My mom had met Todd about 6 months prior, and while I was initially supportive, I gradually grew uneasy. Todd was charming in that way that feels forced, often masking what I couldn't quite place. My gut instinct screamed that his charisma was more a facade than anything genuine. On the night in question, dinner was supposed to be just pasta and garlic bread, a simple affair to celebrate my mom's birthday. The air was thick with the warmth of nostalgia as my mom smiled at the table, her cheeks glowing like the candles flickering nearby. I didn't understand the palpable tension until Todd made an offhand comment about my weight, something he couched in concern, but struck me like a lightning bolt. "You know, if you cut out carbs, you might feel a lot better," he said, chuckling lightly, looking directly at me as though he were giving wise, unsolicited advice. My fork clattered onto the plate as I momentarily lost my voice, the blood rushing to my ears muffling the light-hearted chatter of the other guests around us. I could see my mom's eyes widen with embarrassment and horror, yet her defensiveness seemed to evaporate in the air, as though she were mourning the loss of the good time rather than standing up for me. The tension wrapped around my throat like a noose, and as Todd continued to make jocular remarks about my youthful resilience, I felt my whole body flush with anger. I excused myself to the bathroom, but I didn't need the time to breathe, I needed an exit strategy. I found myself peering at my reflection and wondering why I wasn't capable of standing up for myself. I raced back to the table, determined to reclaim the narrative, ready to carve out a semblance of respect I thought Todd had stripped from me. I didn't know what sparked it, but I decided enough was enough. With my heart pounding, I tapped my glass to gather the attention of the room. "You can't speak to people like that and expect to be welcomed into this family," I stated, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside me. The air crackled with disbelief and silence engulfed us. Todd's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, I saw anger flicker across his face, but before he could retort, My mother intervened. "There's no need for this," she trailed off weakly, her gaze darting between Todd and me. Maybe we should just relax? It's my birthday, after all." But I could feel my resolve solidifying, a growing realization that I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore, I was fighting for my mom, too. The weight of the evening hung heavily in the air, and I finally spoke with clarity. "Hey, Todd, if you can't treat me or anyone here with respect, you should leave." Time held its breath before a stunned silence shattered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, caught off guard. My mom didn't say a word, she just looked at me, a mix of pride and concern dancing across her features, but all I could feel was an overwhelming sense of satisfaction and relief. To my surprise, Todd stood up, muttered something under his breath describing my decision as childish and immature, and stormed out. The air felt lighter in his absence, and though my mom seemed torn, I knew I had crossed a bridge that would change the contours of our family forever. The aftermath was full of raw emotions. My mom and I had long talks about what it meant to be supportive versus enabling, and while our relationship became a tapestry filled with unresolved threads, it also blossomed into something more honest. I learned that being an adult sometimes means cultivating boundaries even with the ones we love. I found my bravery in vulnerability, and it felt exhilarating. Looking back, I often wonder if I truly was the asshole for kicking him out or if he was the one posing as family. I can't say for sure, but I do know that intervening in that moment set the stage for a more authentic partnership between my mom and me, where both of us could feel safe in expressing our truths, unfiltered and free from the poison of unrealistic expectations. Months later, after the dust finally settled, I discovered my mom and I were navigating life together more openly. I realized an unexpected truth: standing up for myself meant standing up for her, too. As for Todd, he became a fleeting shadow of our past, often discussed but never missed, an echo of lessons learned in the most trying of circumstances. In the end, perhaps my query of AITA has more to do with growth than judgment, and I think we both needed that moment more than we realized. Months flowed into each other in a way that felt almost dreamlike, with each moment teaching us something profound and bittersweet about ourselves and the bonds we shared. The initial sting of uncertainty I had felt after kicking Todd out of our home faded into something softer, a gentle reminder of resilience. My relationship with my mom morphed into something I never thought possible. It was as if we had cracked open a door that had long been shut, revealing an entire room of possibilities. My mornings were no longer engulfed in tension. Waking up to a quiet house felt safe, familiar, and comforting. We developed a routine that involved long cups of coffee shared and the soft sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, mornings filled with laughter over half-baked plans for the day. Sometimes we'd simply sit in silence, and the warmth of companionship filled any gaps that words left behind. Each weekend became an opportunity for bonding. We would embark on spontaneous trips to the nearby farmer's market or spend lazy afternoons browsing through old bookstores, laughing over battered copies of novels we never intended to read but always found irresistible. We were healing together, and it became apparent that standing up to Todd had ignited a spark in both of us, encouraging vulnerability and strength in equal measure. During one particularly sunny afternoon, as we nestled into our favorite corner of the local cafe, my mom gently broached the subject of dating again, her cheeks faintly flushed with uncertainty. I felt a wave of protectiveness wash over me. Todd had left his mark on our lives, but I didn't want to let that shadow stay. She spoke of wanting companionship, the simple joys of sharing a meal with someone who wasn't mired in the complexities of past heartaches. I let her words settle within me, recognizing the importance of her desires. It was a reflection of rebirth, not only for her but for both of us. I could hear in her voice a note of hope, one that was contagious. So, I encouraged her to dip her toes back into the dating pool, enjoying the romantic rides of life instead of cowering in fear of what might come. Those discussions led to other confessions, revealing our dreams, our fears, and the haunted remnants of our shared history, including how Todd had twisted us in knots of guilt and control. However, it wasn't all perfect, of course. There were moments when uncomfortable truths reared their heads, like the time my mom had mentioned she ran into Todd at the grocery store, and my stomach had churned at the mere thought. Memories could be both heavy and light, and navigating them felt akin to walking a tightrope, balancing the urge to protect her and allowing her the freedom to forge her own path. We managed the anxiety that brewed between us with deep conversations, ensuring that our newfound bond didn't fall prey to the traditional parent-child roles of expectation but grew into something fluid and mutual instead. As time rolled on, Todd's presence became less of an open wound and more of a distant memory, salted yet healing. Discussing him now felt more like reminiscing about an old storm than grappling with its aftermath. Looking back, the confusion had morphed into clarity, the kind that made it easy to breathe again. I realized that the question of whether I was the asshole was as intricate and layered as the relationships we nurture. It had never been about placing blame but rather about making choices that resonate with the essence of who we are becoming. I pondered long and hard about how far we had come since that chaotic moment of clarity. Each step we took towards understanding ourselves was a flower blooming in the light of truth. Perhaps the most remarkable evolution was when my mom unexpectedly invited me to her first date with someone she'd met through a mutual friend. The invitation was bittersweet, a full-circle moment that mirrored all we had built together. I watched her prepare with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, carefully selecting an outfit that reflected both her newfound spirit and careful consideration. And as she left that evening, confidence in her step and an infectious smile on her face, I felt a swell of pride so potent it nearly overwhelmed me. I wasn't just standing up for her but also encouraging her to stand tall for herself. In the quiet of our home that night, I found comfort in knowing that we could support each other, no longer confined by shadows, but instead illuminated by honest growth. As I climbed into bed, I thought about that question, am I the asshole? And smiled softly to myself. We were human, we stumbled and learned, and through it all, we had found a vibrant thread of connection that knitted us together despite the chaos that tried to pull us apart. As dreams began to weave their way into my consciousness, I felt a whisper of contentment guiding me gently to sleep, surrounded by the soft glow of hope for both our futures. The days that followed felt unusually bright, a stark contrast to the cloud of unease that had loomed over our lives since Todd entered the picture. I could see it in my mom's eyes, a flicker of renewed spirit coursing through her as she began to rediscover parts of herself previously buried beneath layers of obligation and disappointment. We started sharing more, little moments turned into deep conversations, brunches turned into full-day adventures. One Saturday, we ventured to our favorite spot by the lake, a place that had been a backdrop for both cherished memories and silent tensions. As we sat by the water, the sun casting shimmering reflections across the surface, I felt a warmth growing inside my chest. Remember when we used to come here every summer? You always said the ducks could talk if you listened closely enough, I said, a playful glint in my eye. My mom laughed, a joyous sound that felt freeing. I think they've got a lot to say, she replied, especially about that Todd character. The laughter that erupted between us was like a balm, soothing wounds I hadn't realized still existed. Yet, as much as we were improving, there were moments when the past would come crashing back like waves against the shore. I would occasionally catch flashes of sorrow in her expression, remnants of guilt or perhaps loss, when she glanced at an old photograph of our family that hadn't been put away yet. One evening, while we were organizing some boxes in the attic, I found an old journal of hers, filled with entries that painted a portrait of her life before Todd, before her loneliness manifested in desperation. I delicately placed it in front of her and said, "This seems like a memory worth revisiting." She hesitated, eyes darting across the weathered pages, then opened it slowly, scanning the lines like reliving a dream. I watched the myriad of emotions wash over her face, nostalgia, longing, sadness, but ultimately an understanding. It was a journey through her past that we both needed. As the weeks turned into months, and our relationship learned to navigate uncharted waters, I still found moments of uncertainty. I sometimes wondered if kicking Todd out had been the right thing, lingering thoughts tugging at my conscience in the quiet of the night. Would I regret the choices I made? Or would that fissure have been filled with resentment had I chosen silence? When these thoughts crept in, I would remind myself, as I often did, of the strength we were building together. It wasn't just about removing a person from our lives, it was about regaining ownership of who we were and what we wanted for ourselves. In those quiet nights, as I ruminated on my feelings, I realized how much I had grown through this experience. No longer was I a bystander in my own life, but instead, I was a participant, fully engaged and aware. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat at my desk journaling, I noticed my mom standing at the hallway, hesitating as if she were unsure whether to join me or stay in her own thoughts. I looked up, and when our eyes met, I beckoned her over, encouraging without words. She shuffled over, holding a steaming cup of tea, which she offered with a gentle smile. "I've been thinking," she said, and I could hear the tremor in her voice, "about how I've let fear dictate so much of my life, how I let fear tie me to the wrong people." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "It's time to not just stand up for myself, but to keep actively moving forward. I want to try to embrace more of this life, and I want, even need, you with me on this journey." The sincerity in her words washed over me like a refreshing wave, grounding and real. We dove into an evening of plans and dreams, mapping out what our future could look like beyond the realm of past shadows. We discussed hobbies we had put aside, travels we had always dreamed of, and the importance of forging new connections, both inside and outside our family. As months slipped by, I couldn't help but remember that defining moment when everything began to shift, the pivotal decision that nudged us both out of stagnation and into a new dawn. Our bond became a tapestry woven with both laughter and tears, both the shadows of previous pain and the bright threads of hope. In this space, I found myself gently answering my lingering question every time it fluttered through my mind. Nah, I wasn't the asshole after all. I was simply a person learning how to live authentically alongside another. As I finally drifted off to sleep that night, with thoughts of future adventures suspended in my mind, I felt lighter, anchored not by guilt or fear of judgment, but by an unshakable belief in growth and connection. My dreams took flight with vivid images of laughter and sunlight, creating a canvas of what was to come, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a serene sense of anticipation unfurl within me, a sweet promise of tomorrow and all the possibilities it would bring. I never thought asking my friend to bring her own food would turn into such a big deal, but here we are. You see, I live in a small studio apartment that I love dearly, but my budget is tighter than my jeans after the holidays. My friend Emma and I have known each other for years. We met in college, bonded over shared lunches in the cafeteria, her expertly crafted avocado toast against my questionable attempts at repurposing leftover pizza. We had a rhythm, you know? We'd swap meals and recipes without a second thought, but fast forward to today, and the stakes feel different. When Emma texted me last week asking to come over, I felt a surge of excitement, followed by that familiar pang of anxiety about dinner. My cupboards had become depressingly bare. An empty fridge greeted me each time I opened it, which was a stark contrast to the last few years when I had a solid stock of ingredients. I quickly realized that it wouldn't be fair to expect her to feast on my sad assortment of condiments and a wilted cucumber. So, sheepishly, I sent her a text with a suggestion. Hey! Love to have you over. Would you mind bringing something to munch on? As soon as I hit send, a knot twisted in my stomach. Was I being rude? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the nagging thoughts that followed. I wasn't trying to be stingy, just practical. But as the evening approached, I could feel my anxiety building. When she arrived, her expression was a mix of surprise and a hint of disappointment, and I immediately felt small. You really asked me to bring food? She laughed, her eyes slightly narrowed. It cut deep. I just thought, I stammered, trying to make sense of my own reasoning. I haven't had the chance to go grocery shopping this week. Creating a facade that everything was fine, I eached out for her usual laid-back demeanor, hoping it would lighten the mood. Instead, my home felt suddenly electric with tension. We settled on my tiny couch with a bowl of popcorn she had graciously brought. The crunches were too loud, filling the silence that stretched between us. I wanted to explain, to really convey my struggles, both financially and emotionally, but every attempt felt stunted, a half-formed thought getting lost in the noise of our moment. As we forced laughter while reminiscing about old times, I could sense that our dynamic had shifted slightly, and I wasn't sure how to mend it. After she left, I spent the rest of the night thinking about how trivial my request had been. Was I really the jerk for trying to be responsible, or had I crossed some invisible line in our friendship? Days turned into a week, and I'll admit, I was too cowardly to reach out. I thought about everything in a loop, replaying moments that I wished I had handled differently. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I started drafting a post on a Reddit thread. My heart raced as the words poured out, sharing every doubt I had, every moment of joy and sorrow we'd experienced together. I anxiously awaited responses. To my surprise, the comments flooded in with empathy and understanding. "You're not an asshole, you're just being cautious," one user wrote. Their kind sentences soothed my worries a little, reminding me that I wasn't alone in navigating these awkward dynamics. A few days later, to my shock, Emma surprised me with a visit. This time, she showed up with a homemade pizza, not just any pizza, but one with toppings we used to argue about in school. We laughed until we cried over memories and bad ingredients, finally feeling like ourselves again amidst the melted cheese and gooey toppings. As we shared the meal, it occurred to me that this little hiccup wasn't a final verdict on our friendship. If anything, it opened the door for deeper honesty, that sometimes we need to be real about our situations, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. We talked it out, and it felt refreshing. I found comfort in her reassurance that there were no hard feelings. As I watched her eat, my heart softened more than I thought possible. I knew I still had a way to go with being open and vulnerable, learning to ask for help without shame, and recognizing the beauty of shared meals, no matter who brought the food. As we sat there, the warmth of the late afternoon sun spilling through my kitchen window, I couldn't help but reflect on how this little spat had shifted the ground beneath our feet. The table, now laden with an odd assortment of takeout containers and half-eaten dinners, felt transformed from a battleground into a sanctuary of sorts. As Sarah absent-mindedly picked at her fries, a mix of ketchup and ranch smeared across her plate, I felt grateful for her ability to laugh at the situation. "You know," she said between bites, "I could have easily been more upset. But in the grand scheme of things, it's just food." Her smile was genuine, but I knew there was a depth to it that hinted at her own struggles. I watched her, realizing that my discomfort had resonated with something deeper inside her as well. Maybe we both carried a little baggage that we had been hesitant to unpack. The conversation meandered from deep reflections on our friendship to lighter topics, like the hilarious antics of our mutual friends and the latest Netflix series we had been binging. With every joke, every shared look of amusement, I felt a layer of tension peel away. It was strange how vulnerability had become the unexpected glue holding our evening together, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a pivotal moment. For once, instead of clenching my fists over my own insecurities, I was loosening the grip and allowing acceptance into the cracks. As Sarah spoke about her recent promotion at work, animatedly detailing her new responsibilities, I took a moment to absorb what lay beneath the surface. It was evident she had been pushing herself hard, like all of us do in our quest for success, attaching her worth to her achievements. I had never really seen her in that light. We often navigated through life like two ships passing in the night, seldom hovering around each other's storms. "Hey, Sarah," I ventured, needing to bring up the elephant in the room again, about our food conversation. She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Yeah? What about it?" I hesitated, unsure if I really wanted to dip into the well of awkwardness again. But something compelled me forward. "I think it's important for both of us to feel comfortable sharing our situations with each other. I don't want you to feel like you can't come over because you're worried about food or finances. We're friends, right? We should share everything." She nodded slowly, and I could see her processing my words. "I appreciate that. Honestly, I've never thought about it like that before. I guess I assumed if I came over, I should contribute. But I would hate for either of us to feel burdened in our friendship, especially when we're just trying to be there for each other." And there it was, a booming truth echoing in my mind. In our world of social expectations, I had been clinging to the idea that self-sufficiency was the end goal, but maybe friendship was just a dance of give and take. I couldn't remember the last time we'd simply let down our guards and leaned into the beautiful chaos of sharing moments together without the need for pretense. After dinner, we decided to make the most of the evening. We wandered over to my balcony, the sunset painting the sky in a wash of oranges and pinks. We talked long into the night, our laughter mingling with the distant sounds of the city. For the first time, I felt the freedom of being wholly myself with her, unencumbered by the fear of judgment. I realized that by addressing our discomfort, we had forged a deeper connection than mere shared meals. We had unveiled the threads of honesty and support that we could weave into the fabric of our friendship. As she packed up the remaining food, I felt a lightness settling in my chest. We agreed to alternate cooking duties moving forward, a new tradition starting that night. I knew there would be challenges ahead. There would be more meals shared and, inevitably, more awkward conversations. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a daunting task. It felt like an invitation to grow. Life is messy, friendships are complex, and sometimes the most beautiful moments emerge from the chaos. And surprisingly, I found myself looking forward to what lay ahead, a journey built on authenticity, laughter, and perhaps, a shared plate of cold fries. As I watched her meticulously dissect the lasagna I had prepared, grateful but honest about its slightly undercooked noodles, I realized how essential these moments of vulnerability were. Our conversations meandered from the food we were sharing to the deeper questions nestled in our lives, dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. I learned that she had been feeling overwhelmed at work, juggling deadlines like a circus performer. With flaming torches. "Sometimes I just want to quit," she admitted between bites, her voice small as if admitting defeat. I could see the stress etched on her face, the corners of her mouth twitching downwards, and it stirred something deep inside me. We exchanged reassurances, her struggles reminded me of my own, and perhaps that was why I felt compelled to invite her in the first place. The sound of forks clinking against plates filled the quiet space between us, creating a rhythm that felt comforting, like the pulse of a warm heartbeat. I offered her a second slice, and she graciously accepted, saying something about needing all the sustenance she could get. As she dug in with genuine appreciation, I felt a sense of connection bloom, vibrant and alive between us. It was a revelation, right there, amidst the backdrop of my cozy, albeit cluttered kitchen. I discovered that sharing wasn't solely about the food. It was about the act of carving out time for each other, to savor not just the flavors but the stories that came with them. When the dishes were finally cleared away, we sat together on my couch, her laughter dancing like sunlight in the room, chasing away the shadows that had lingered too long in both our hearts. There was something ineffable about that evening. It felt like we had pierced through a veil of pretense, revealing the raw fabric of our friendship. I assured her we'd tackle the cooking duties equally, promising to bring my best every time, except for the cold fries incident. We both chuckled at that one. In the days that followed, there were more meal preparations, more invitations extended, and they were filled with the same laughter and vulnerability. We had created this little sanctuary of openness where the awkwardness of our past discussions had transformed into playful banter, a dance of sharing rather than a struggle. My heart felt buoyant as I navigated through these moments, slowly shedding the layers that had covered me like an unwieldy blanket. I began to realize that friendships are indeed a living, breathing thing. They require nourishment, like the meals we prepared together. As we took turns hosting, sometimes we cooked, other times we ordered in, and occasionally we compromised with a bowl of cereal and mismatched utensils. Each gathering cemented our bond further. Gradually, I learned to voice my feelings without fear, sharing my insecurities, my worries, and yes, even my cravings. There was something beautifully symbiotic about this arrangement, creating space for both of us to express our needs honestly. One evening, as we sat surrounded by half-empty pizza boxes and laughter spilling into the corners of my living room, I caught a glimpse of the journey we had traveled. The small discomfort of that first conversation felt like a stepping stone leading us into territory rich with understanding and connection. I realize now that our friendship isn't just about bringing food, it's about bringing ourselves into the open, flaws and all. As warm memories threaded together with laughter and late-night heart-to-hearts, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the bumps along the road. They had carved out this rhythm of authenticity in my life, reminding me that vulnerability isn't something to be feared, it's a bridge connecting us to one another in this beautifully messy thing we call life. And as I glanced over at her, her laughter mingling with the soft glow of the evening light, I felt a peace settle in. We had turned a once uncomfortable moment into a source of joy, building a deeper friendship around the table of shared experiences. This was not the end, but just the beginning of many meals to come. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I'd be questioning if I was the asshole for not reminding my fiancée that stoves are hot, but here we are. It was one of those typical Sunday afternoons, the kind where the sun spills in through the kitchen window, taunting me with warmth while I stood at the cluttered counter, trying to whip up something decent for dinner. I was juggling ingredients and listening to my fiancé, Tom, talk about his day, his voice fading in and out as I focused on slicing vegetables. Tom is the kind of guy who's enticed by a good recipe, except that he hasn't quite grasped the unspoken rules of culinary safety, specifically when it comes to the stove. It might sound petty, but I really thought he was old enough to know better. We've lived together for almost 3 years, and I've certainly burned myself enough times to have learned to be careful. I could feel the heat wafting from the burners, and as I glanced over my shoulder, I saw Tom standing too close to the stove, engrossed in a video on his phone about some gaming news. I remember thinking, he knows stoves are hot. My heart sank when I heard a sudden hiss, the sound of bacon grease meeting an exposed burner. In a split second, he pulled his hand back from the hot pan, yelping as he danced back like a toddler who just discovered a sea of lava. The moment felt like it unfolded in slow motion, the shock on his face, the way he shook his hand in disbelief, and the acrid smell of scorched skin starting to mingle with the savory aroma of dinner. I rushed over, my heart racing, both embarrassment and guilt seeping through me as I skated between irritation and concern. I mean, I knew I should have said something, right? But part of me thought he'd get it by now. Later that night, while I was dabbing ointment on his blistered skin, I tried to tease it away, saying something like, "You know, I did think about reminding you." Tom laughed, but it was that half-hearted kind of laugh, the one that told me he wasn't really finding it funny. "Maybe next time, you could actually remind me," he shot back, a playful spark in his eyes, but the undercurrent of annoyance was unmistakable. I grumbled something about how I didn't want to treat him like a kid who needed constant supervision, but deep down, I felt that creeping sense of guilt. Was I supposed to remind him about everything? A part of me wanted him to figure it out, to learn through his own mistakes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I had failed him somehow. Getting into bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, the shadows whispering my doubts back to me. Am I the asshole for letting him learn this lesson the hard way, or should I have recognized the potential for disaster before it even happened? The thoughts spiraled in my head. I felt exhausted. Should I have coddled him, or does that just breed dependency? Days turned into weeks, and while Tom's burn healed, the tension felt unresolved. I would catch him stealing glances at the stove, then avoiding it like it was the plague. I could see he was frustrated with himself, and sometimes I wondered if I needed to provide that level of reassurance he sought. Maybe it was the kids' show we just binge-watched, but there was something unsettling about waiting for him to catch fire literally or figuratively. Eventually, I brought it up during a quiet lunch date. You know, I didn't mean to imply I wouldn't remind you. I just thought you'd know on your own. I barely recognized the nervousness creeping into my own voice. Tom looked at me, his brow furrowed like he was struggling to figure something out. I guess I thought that too, but I still end up doing dumb stuff. It's like walking into a wall when you're distracted. His vulnerability caught me by surprise. We ended up sharing a laugh, easing the tension between us as we agreed maybe a reminder every now and then wouldn't hurt. It wasn't about being infantilized, but more about nurturing each other as we learned together. That felt like a step toward a stronger partnership, and as we cleaned up those last few moments together, I realized it wasn't about who was right or wrong, it was about how we navigated through those moments as one. So, was I the asshole? Maybe, but we had each owned our share of the lesson, and in the end, we grew a little closer because of it. As I washed the last pot, the warmth of those shared moments lingered in the air like the scent of garlic and thyme we'd used in our dinner. The lessons from the evening, those little nudges toward a deeper understanding, felt more sacred than the burned skin that would heal in time. I glanced over at Alex, carefully drying the plates, his brow furrowed in concentration. I recalled the tension from earlier, the thick silence that had filled our small kitchen when I could see the anger flash in his eyes after he accidentally brushed against the stove. I had been brushing my own hands against my apron, fully aware of the burn risk and completely unprepared for the sudden frustration that erupted between us. Why didn't you say anything? He had snapped, his voice sharp and raw, filled with that mix of hurt and defensiveness that only surfaces when you feel vulnerable. I winced at the memory, the way his words had cut through the air, as much of a burn as the one on his wrist. But here we were now, laughter creeping back as we joked about the overly ambitious meal I'd tried to prepare. Next time, we just order pizza, I smirked, nudging his side playfully with my hip, and the tension melted a bit more. Because the truth was, I had worried about reminding him of the obvious. I had felt like a schoolteacher, a role neither of us wanted to slip into. I breathed in deeply, letting the scent of the soap and water soothe away the earlier unease. With every dish placed in its rightful cabinet, I was reminded that love isn't just about the beautiful moments, it's also about navigating the bumps and bruises together. That kind of partnership required a blend of trust and patience, where we could admit our faults without fear of being judged as incompetent. When he turned to me and offered a slight smile, I felt a pang of gratitude wash over me. You know, he said softly, I appreciate you. I don't always think about the obvious stuff, and sometimes I might even think I'm above reminders. I nodded, the words hanging between us like a delicate thread, as we stood in our imperfect kitchen doing our best to create a life together. I'm here to remind you, but I won't make it a habit to be your alarm, I teased, and we both chuckled, relief flooding back in as I felt the weight of the day lift ever so slightly. I knew we'd have our share of misunderstandings, but maybe there was beauty in that chaos too. Would I be the perfect partner? Not a chance. But would I be there, paddling alongside him as we both tried to find our balance? Absolutely. And as we finally finished up, I glanced at the stove, still off, thankfully, and wondered how many more lessons waited for us in the future. It felt oddly comforting, this path we were carving out, uncertain yet ours. Maybe I did have some faults, but those didn't define our journey together, they merely added depth to it, guiding us toward the next meal, metaphorically and literally. That evening lingered in the air, a strange mix of tension and relief, both of us grappling with the warmth of the kitchen that had witnessed our little storm. As I washed the last dish, bubbles rising and popping in the soapy water, I felt Jacob's presence just behind me, his breath steady and comforting. I'm really sorry about earlier, he said, his voice softer than I had heard in a while. I hate that it escalated like that. I turned, meeting his gaze, and saw a flicker of vulnerability there. I get it, we're both learning, I replied, trying to convey that I understood it wasn't just him. He offered a half smile, and something about it reminded me of all the shared moments we'd had, not just the disagreements. The late-night ice cream runs, the spontaneous kitchen dance parties, and even the marathon binge-watching sessions that sometimes turned into long conversations about our dreams. "I guess we're still growing together," he murmured, and his words set off a sweet flood of recognition in me. It was so easy to focus on the stormy parts of our relationship, but here we were, carving out our space to be imperfect together. I wiped my hands dry and took a moment to really look at him, the way his brow furrowed in thought, the way he absently tucked a loose curl behind his ear. "And we can remind each other about the hot stove, right?" I teased lightly, trying to bring back the levity we both needed. He laughed, a genuine, bright laugh that still echoed in the corners of the room, and I felt the tension fade a little more. "Deal. Just promise you'll remind me about the knives too, I'm the one always cutting myself," he joked back, and it felt like we had just forged an unspoken pact. We began packing away the leftover ingredients, and as I handed him a container, our fingers brushed, igniting an electric sweetness that sent a shiver down my spine. Moments like these felt more nourishing than the food we were preparing. I think it was in our shared laughter, our playful nudges against each other, and the small, everyday acknowledgments where quiet love really resided. Later, as we settled onto the couch, plates of dinner resting on our laps, I could hear the comforting hum of the world outside. The window was slightly ajar, letting in the cool evening breeze, and I felt alive in that moment, aware of how easily things could slip back into chaos. "What if we make a habit out of cooking together? Like a weekly thing?" I proposed, and Jacob pondered. "Yeah, that sounds great. But we should probably write down a safety checklist first," he joked again, his playful approach making it easier to imagine our future kitchen escapades. So, we started mapping out our weeks over dinner, Tuesday taco nights, Friday pizza parties. It felt like a plan to fortify ourselves against future mishaps. All the while, I noticed the way his excitement bubbled through, and I couldn't help but smile at how far we'd come in just that one day. As we leaned over the table, tracing a layout of ingredients and ideas, I was struck by a thought. Life would never stop throwing challenges our way, but maybe, just maybe, those very challenges were what would draw us closer. And so, as we settled into the couch's plush embrace, my heart brimmed with hope. Lessons would come, and sometimes they might burn, just like that stove. But I knew we'd learn to navigate it together, to build our little fortress of understanding and compassion, one dish at a time. The beauty of partnership is not about being flawless, it's about embracing our imperfections and finding joy in the space between. There's a weight that lingers on my chest, a secret I've carried for far too long, and it all began on that warm summer day when we were kids, bouncing on the old trampoline in my backyard, laughter echoing like music in the air. My childhood friend, Mark, was more than just a companion. He was my partner in crime, the brother I never had, always up for an adventure, even if that often involved the kinds of mischief that led to scoldings from our parents. As we grew up, that bond only deepened, forged in deep conversations, shared dreams, and endless inside jokes. But life has a strange way of pulling people apart. College took Mark to a city far away, and while we stayed in touch, the distance began to change the nature of our relationship. Then came the day I had always longed for, the birth of my son, Ethan. In that moment, a fire ignited in me, an overwhelming urge to pay tribute to the person who had been a cornerstone in my childhood. After much contemplation, I decided to name my son after him, Ethan Mark, a name I believed would honor that friendship. It felt right, a quiet bond woven into the fabric of my being, yet as the months passed, a dread began to swell in the pit of my stomach. Mark had no idea. To him, I simply had a son, and I had neglected to share the truth behind his name, a truth so laced with love and affection that it became suffocating. Every text, every call, felt like a tightrope walk, and I found myself instinctively avoiding any conversation that could lead to the revelation. The guilt gnawed at me, almost as if naming my son after him was a betrayal by keeping it from him, a part of our shared history that I denied. The thought echoed in my mind, and with each passing day, I imagined how Mark would feel upon discovering the truth. Would he be honored, or would he think I was withholding that love? The indecision ate at me mercilessly. One evening, after tucking Ethan into bed, I found myself scrolling through our old photos on my phone, pictures of us laughing, getting muddy in our youth, clutching our ice cream cones like trophies. There it was, a haunting nostalgia that held both beauty and pain, and in that moment, I wondered if I had tarnished that bond I cherished so much. As days turned to weeks, I could feel the pressure build until it snapped one Sunday afternoon while Mark was visiting, sitting on my couch, laughing over tales from our school days as Ethan played in the background, blissfully unaware. When the laughter faded, I felt compelled to confess everything, to claim my vulnerability. "Mark, there is something I need to tell you," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He looked apprehensive, those familiar brown eyes squinting with curiosity. I took a deep breath and shared my truth, the name, the reasons behind it, and the selfish fear that held me back. Silence enveloped the room. Time felt heavy as it ticked away, and for a moment, I thought I had ruined everything. Then Mark's smile slowly returned. And tears welled in his eyes as he took my hand. "You've carried this for so long, haven't you? It means the world to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Relief washed over me in waves, replacing the burden that was once there. In the aftermath of that revelation, we shared stories about what it meant to grow up together and how we would guide our sons into that same reckless joy we had known. I realized that sometimes, the scariest secrets can lead to the biggest breakthroughs, and as Mark hugged Ethan tightly, my heart swelled with comfort, knowing I had shared a piece of our history that would only serve to deepen our bond as friends. As I reflect on that day now, I can say it was a turning point, and while I may have delayed confronting my truth, the love I had for Mark and the silent understanding between us had transcended fear and hesitation. Update: it's been a few months since that day, and I can honestly say that my relationship with Mark has grown even stronger. He has embraced Ethan like a second son, creating new memories that are steeped in love and laughter. We have started a tradition of adventure weekends, where we take our sons to the places we used to explore, and each new adventure is, in its own way, an homage to our past friendship. I've learned that holding on to fear only creates distance, while sharing truth and vulnerability can build bridges. The best part? The other day, I overheard Mark telling Ethan about how special his name is, a legacy that they both now share, something I never realized would bring us even closer. Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it? Mark and I had found ourselves laughing over memories from our childhood, as we set up camp at the river where we used to fish under the setting sun. The sound of crickets filled the air, weaving an invisible tapestry of nostalgia around us. My heart swelled at the sight of our sons playing nearby, their laughter mingling seamlessly with the sounds of nature. They climbed trees as we had once done, completely lost in their own world of adventure. I couldn't help but marvel at the bond forming not just between our children but between Mark and me as well. Every story I shared with him was tinged with the bright hues of reminiscence, each tale deeper than the last, revealing pieces of my heart I had kept tucked away out of fear. The truth about Ethan's name still lingered in the air, a sweet secret that felt like a warm hug every time I caught a glimpse of Mark's easy smile. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, I took a moment to reflect on the path that had led me here, the countless moments that could have gone differently if fear had held the reins. It wasn't merely a river running alongside our camp, it felt symbolic of the bonds being forged right in front of me, flowing with potential and history all at once. So many years had passed since that fateful moment in high school, the day I knew my best friend was facing more hardships than I could understand, yet I had chosen to remain silent about the pain I felt, the loss of the friendship we once had. But tonight, with the gentle hum of nature all around, I sensed that I was ready to let go of my hesitation. I would tell him the truth about naming Ethan after him, that in the quiet moments of my son's life, I found pieces of Mark's spirit reflected back at me. It was more than just a name, it was a bridge spanning 2 generations, a reminder that love can withstand time, hurt, and misunderstandings. With the night wrapping around us like a cozy blanket, I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs, and resolved to reveal the heartfelt significance behind Ethan's name before the weekend was over. As I glanced over at Mark, my heart warmed with confidence. I was no longer afraid. That evening, as we sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows under the vast expanse of twinkling stars, I knew the sound of our children's laughter was just the beginning of a new legacy, one built on honesty and acceptance. The stillness surrounding us felt embraced by clarity, the very atmosphere nudged me forward. I marked the moment, relishing the flickering flames, the laughter, and the connection, reminding myself that what could be gained from this truth was far greater than any fear I had harbored. As I prepared to share that piece of my heart, something monumental shifted within me, the realization that having friendships rooted in vulnerability might be one of the truest forms of strength we could carry into the future. With my heart racing but my resolve firm, I waited for the right moment during our adventure weekend, a cozy bonfire under a star-studded sky. Mark was flipping burgers on the grill, the scent merging with the crisp evening air, when I saw the light of curiosity glinting in his eyes. I could feel the warmth of the fire reflecting the warmth of the moment, and it occurred to me that this was the perfect time to tell him. Our sons were wrapped in their own world, gabbing excitedly about their favorite stories and superheroes. I could hear Ethan's contagious laughter, and it pulled my attention back, reminding me of how quickly time had slipped by since Mark and I were kids ourselves, giggling over silly games and hidden treasures in the woods. I took a deep breath, gathering courage stirring within me, and I called Mark over, inviting him to join me at the edge of our gathering. He approached, holding 2 plates piled high with burgers and s'mores, a proud smile lighting his face. Ever feel like the past has a funny way of sticking around? I began, surprised at how easily the words flowed, even with the weight they carried. Mark raised an eyebrow, setting the plates down on the low wooden table as he leaned in closer, genuinely intrigued. "What's stirring in that head of yours?" I chuckled lightly, thankful that laughter had helped to diffuse the air. "It's just. You remember those days we would dream about our futures? Sitting on that rickety old swing set?" Mark's smile widened as nostalgia danced through his eyes, the flickers of the flames reflecting the warmth of those shared memories. "How could I forget? We had it all figured out back then." "Yeah, and we thought we'd name our future kids after each other, right?" The jest hung in the air for a moment, a playful acknowledgement of our childhood innocence, but I wasn't quite ready to lead with humor. "Actually, Mark, I need to tell you something." He tilted his head, curiosity morphing into something deeper, more sincere. "What is it?" "The truth is, I named my son Ethan after you." Saying it out loud felt like exhaling after holding my breath for too long, the words hovering between us, heavy with years of unspoken sentiment. "I wanted to honor that friendship we had, and you have meant so much to me," I admitted, scanning his face for reaction, watching as a mixture of surprise and admiration flickered across it. His gaze softened and then crinkled at the edges, his smile radiating warmth. "Really? That's amazing, I had no idea," he said, seemingly touched. It was as if a secret barrier had shattered between us, bringing forth an unspoken bond that hadn't faded, merely waited for the right moment to reveal itself. My heart swelled, relief coursing through me. We spent a moment in silence, the night wrapping us in its comforting embrace as crickets chirped a soft symphony. "I always felt this connection," Mark continued, and there was resonance in his voice that made me feel seen, understood. It was cathartic. "To think we'd name our sons after each other, what a legacy, right?" In that moment, it felt as if a tapestry of our lives had woven together in the most beautiful way. The laughter of our sons burst through our revelatory bubble, pulling us back into joyful reality, but I felt lighter, unburdened by secrets. The conversation flowed easily after that, as we shared what being fathers had taught us, how our relationships had evolved, and what it meant, beyond mere naming, to keep the spirit of our childhood dreams alive. As the night wore on and the fire dwindled, I realized that our friendship had transformed not just from nostalgia but from honesty and vulnerability, those seemingly simple acts now the very foundation of something enduring, something that would guide our children in their future adventures. As I exchanged stories with Mark, laughing at old memories, I understood that life doesn't always unfold in the straightforward paths we envision. Sometimes it dances around corners filled with uncertainty only to reveal deeper connections than we had dared to believe possible. When the evening finally came to a close, the embers warming our goodbyes, I held on to the moment, knowing that this is what sharing life truly meant. I went home that night feeling grateful, armed with a renewed understanding of friendship and family, and pondering how this legacy of authenticity would ripple through the years ahead. With Ethan asleep in his bed, and dreams whispering promises of adventure, I realized that the future was a blank canvas, and with every moment I shared, I could paint it with love and truth. And at the end of the day, isn't that the greatest adventure of all? It was supposed to be just another holiday gathering, filled with laughter, festive decorations, and a bit too much eggnog, yet it transformed into one of the most pivotal moments of my life. My close-knit group of friends had established a tradition of a white elephant gift exchange, where the goal was to bring something humorous or quirky to swap around the circle. This year, I felt inspired. After days of thinking, I decided to gift a vintage-looking box, aged like an artifact, wrapped in gold foil that glimmered under the twinkling Christmas lights. Little did any of us know, it was more than just an old box. To everyone's amusement, when my best friend Alex unwrapped it, inside was a scratch-off lottery ticket I had thrown in on a whim, just to keep things lighthearted. Laughter erupted when he scratched it off only to find out that it was worth over $1 million. At that moment, it felt like I was in a fairy tale. Yet, as the initial shock began to fade, a heavy feeling settled in my stomach, as excitement morphed into uncertainty. For days, we celebrated, a party filled with playful banter, immense joy, and, surprisingly, stakes that transformed the bonds of friendship into something frayed and fragile. The conversation soon shifted from congratulatory remarks to some friends expressing that, because the winning ticket had originated from my white elephant gift, I had an obligation to share the wealth. After all, the ticket had not just sprung forth from thin air, it was part of a game played between us. I remember sitting at home in my small, cozy apartment that night, staring at the blinking light of my phone as the group chat erupted with opinions, judgments, and a sense of entitlement that rattled me to my core. I began to feel torn. On one hand, I wanted to help my friends, especially since they had been my support group through thick and thin, but on the other, it was a significant amount of money that I had never expected to see, and it felt deeply personal to me. As I continued to navigate the whirlwind of discussions, some of my friends took it a step further, outright demanding their share of my newfound fortune. They argued that I shouldn't have even included the ticket as part of the gift, highlighting how, as the giver, I had unintentionally created this awkward position. My doubts began to grow into whispers in my mind, trying to convince me that I was the one who was being selfish and greedy. Such thoughts gnawed at me, leading to sleepless nights, but I also cherished the idea that perhaps this money could help me rebuild my life. I had been stuck in a rut, toiling away in a mediocre job that barely paid enough to cover rent and bills, and now I could not only pay off my debts, but I could also travel, invest in furthering my career, and maybe even start on that overly ambitious dream of mine, opening a small bookstore cafe by the coast where stories would seep through the walls like sweet laughter. But the rift grew. The gifts from Christmas became burdens that I contemplated every waking moment. To distance myself from the conversations that blurred the lines of friendship, I withdrew from the group chat for a time, taking each day to regroup. I took long walks in the nearby park, letting the cool air fill my lungs while my mind wrestled with the notion of entitlement. I even visited an old bookstore to distract myself, where I could lose hours wandering between the bookshelves that smelled of musty paper and adventure. Eventually, after a week of wrestling with my thoughts, I decided to face my friends. I arranged a casual dinner, a final gathering to resolve our unspoken tension. As the evening unfolded, I chose to be honest. I sat them down, carefully explaining how the ticket had landed in a box meant solely for fun, devoid of the weight of expectations and obligations. I wanted to stress that while they were my dear friends, the money felt deeply personal to me, a newfound hope for my future. I could see their disappointment, and truthfully, it pierced me. The laughter that had once echoed around us now felt muted. However, I also saw glimmers of understanding in their eyes, and that conversation provided the resolution we so desperately needed. It wasn't about who deserved what, but about maintaining the bonds we had nurtured over the years. As the night wound down, one friend, Clara, who had always been the voice of reason, gave me a reflective look. She smiled softly and stated, "You know, sometimes life throws us surprises, not to be shared or divided, but to change our paths." It struck me deeply. That moment became a tapestry of emotions, a blend of relief, sadness, and resolve. I chose to embrace the good that the lottery had brought into my life while also holding steadfast to the relationships that mattered. In the weeks that followed, I found my footing. I still communicated with my friends, but now it was with less pressure, and whatever division had sprung eased with understanding and communication. Instead of sharing a part of my winnings, I offered to treat them to a weekend trip to celebrate our friendship without the strings of money. And in many ways, the act of spending time together felt even more fulfilling than any monetary exchange. In the end, it was not just about the lottery ticket but about navigating the complexities of relationships and choosing to value friendship over obligation. Ultimately, the lottery had not stripped me of friends but led me to reassess what truly mattered, the authenticity of connections that would thrive regardless of wealth. Update: a few months later, I took another little leap. I followed my heart and opened that bookstore cafe. It was cozy and beautifully chaotic, filled with shelves of stories inviting all who came in. I was pleasantly surprised when some friends offered to contribute their time and skills to help me shoulder the load. Clara even stepped up and helped design the space, jarred mugs with coded messages printed on the sides for the secret menu. There's joy in seeing the delight on people's faces as they step into a world of books and coffee, and on Saturdays, when the place is bustling, I've realized that my path hasn't just changed, it's blossomed into something altogether beautiful. But just as everything was coming together, a shadow loomed over my little haven of caffeine and literature. It was a few months after our grand opening when I received an unexpected call from my brother, Mark, who, after a string of misfortunes, had moved back in with our parents. "You won't believe it," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "I bought a lottery ticket, and I actually won." $50,000. I could hear the triumph behind his words, and part of me felt uplifted by his good fortune, but another part of me squirmed at the implications. After all, during that white elephant gift exchange a few weeks prior, we had used the ticket as just that, a joke among friends, something to pass around for laughs, like the ugly sweater no one wanted. The ticket had cost a mere $10, but now it had transformed into an unexpected fortune. The problem lingered in the back of my mind like an itch. Should I pay my brother back for that ticket? My first instinct was to smile and celebrate his success, acknowledging his hard luck turning into a windfall. However, as I watched the cafe thrive, my initial goodwill began to warp under the weight of guilt. I hadn't contributed anything to that silly ticket, nor had I envisioned sharing the wealth or what it might mean for my brother to suddenly have significant amounts of money. It shouldn't be a burdensome obligation, should it? The constant flirtation with self-doubt made my heart race. As I ruminated, I also felt a growing resentment rise against Mark. He was back with my parents, lacking direction, while I had pulled myself together to create something fulfilling. Every week, he kept bringing up potential ideas for what he could do with the winnings. A vacation. Then a new car. In those moments, I found myself resenting that $10 ticket more and more. Weeks passed, and I noticed more requests from Mark. While the cafe had become a green and nurturing space for creativity, Mark's intentions weighed heavy on me. "Why don't you just loan me a little bit to get started?" he'd suggest, each word slithering into my brain like smoke. "You can always recoup it after I get my business going." One afternoon, as I stirred the rich, dark coffee, my stomach twisted with anxiety. Clara noticed and stopped by with a gentle touch to my arm. "What's bothering you?" she asked, and I hesitated before spilling my thoughts like beans into a grinding machine. She listened quietly, concern knitting her brow. "You're not obligated to share anything," she said finally, taking a sip of her espresso, "but you shouldn't feel guilty if you want to help." But there was more to it. It was the emotional knot I had with Mark, our childhood, entwined in responsibility and rivalry. I resented the fact that he had the ability to get something for nothing while I had to build everything from my courage and sweat. One Thursday afternoon, I finally decided to confront him. "Listen, Mark," I started, holding the phone to my ear, feeling the warmth of the cafe's summer breeze danced around me. "I know you're excited about your winnings, and I'm happy for you, but you need to understand. I can't help with your plans. That ticket was never mine to claim or share." His silence felt heavy, a moment too long before he spoke. "Wow, so that's it?" The chill in his tone froze me in place. It felt dreadful but necessary to stand firm, to balance the weight of harsh truth with the buoyancy of love. "But it's my ticket," he continued defiantly. "You were there when I bought it. It's not just luck, I could have picked another ticket, you know? Be better. Be supportive." With every word he poured out, my resolve thinned. "I'm trying to be supportive, Mark, but you can't expect me, of all people, to just distribute money when I'm still figuring out my own life." Somehow, I managed to hang up without feeling like a complete jerk, and as I processed the conversation, I finally felt a flicker of relief. Time passed, and the confrontation became a raw, necessary wound that slowly healed. Through the simmering tension with my brother, I found clarity about my own dreams. The cafe continued to thrive, filled with laughter, warmth, and the soft scent of beans roasting in the back. Clara became my confidant, and together we hosted small writing workshops, each word crafted under the light of connection. Despite the distance with Mark, I began to accept that his choices were his own, separate from my journey, as I found empowerment in the depths of the rooted relationships I built day by day. Months later, I received a text from Mark, one that was devoid of the old bitterness. "Hey, I went on a little trip. It was great. Hope the cafe's doing well," he wrote. A simple note that felt woven with maturity and intent. I responded, letting him know how much the cafe had grown. I didn't owe him anything, and while our relationship became more distant over time, I couldn't help but feel a thread of hope weaving back through our connection, fragile yet promising, just like the very venture I cherished. As I stood behind the counter one morning, with sunlight spilling golden rays through the window, I realized that sometimes, making choices for your happiness meant letting go of guilt, a lesson I hoarded quietly as I breathed in the intoxicating aroma of roasted beans and fresh stories yet to be told. The cafe continued to flourish, much to my delight. I leaned into the rhythm of each day, where the sound of the door chiming would greet me with the promise of new connections. One particularly crisp morning, I found myself overwhelmed with gratitude as I greeted regulars and newcomers. Alike, their smiles infectious, the aroma of brewing coffee wrapping around us like a soft blanket. Clara had this way of lighting up the room whenever she walked in. She carried an energy that was both calming and invigorating. That day, however, felt different. A magnetic energy buzzed beneath the ordinary hustle and bustle. I was preparing for a community event, one that Clara had suggested to foster deeper ties with our patrons. We decided to host a monthly open mic night, where writers, musicians, and poets could showcase their talents, a showcase of voices competing only with the sound of clattering mugs and warm laughter. It was during our final preparations, stringing fairy lights above the circular tables and piling chairs in cozy arrangements, that I noticed Jason standing outside the cafe, hands shoved deep in his pockets with that same familiar expression etched across his features, a mix of longing and hesitation. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. No matter how far our lives had drifted apart, the sight of him brought back a whirlwind of memories and a rush of old emotions. For a moment, I debated whether to invite him inside, but the fog of uncertainty clouded my decision. As the evening wore on and the cafe came alive, untouched notes filled the air, voices weaving tales both heartwarming and haunting. Clara's infectious laughter faded in and out as I caught glimpses of familiar faces sharing moments, and then, almost as if time had folded, Jason stepped through the door. The room hushed momentarily, strangers turned into an audience, and I felt my pulse quicken. He looked around, his eyes searching, and landed on me with a gaze so earnest that it melted the seconds into something palpable. I couldn't help but manage a weak smile, my heart oscillating between pleasure and panic. After the first act concluded, he approached me, and I could feel the vibrations of my surroundings dim, the clinking glasses and buzzing chatter fading into the backdrop of our shared history. "I came to see you," he confessed, his voice the same as I remembered but laced with a timbre of vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. I blinked, struggling for words. Here we stood, transformed by time, yet the undercurrents of unspoken sentiments lingered in the air like a fine mist. I asked him how he had found me, and the conversation spilled out like secrets carefully hoarded, revealing pieces of our lives since we last made contact. He told me about his trials, struggles with his decisions, and how he'd realized the importance of relationships that once mattered to him. Encouraging him to join the open mic crowd, I found myself eased by the moment. The fear I had pinpointed as regret fell softly as he stepped up to perform, seemingly transformed by the acceptance that enveloped him. As he shared his heartfelt song, the audience felt like a gentle embrace, and I couldn't help but lose myself in the harmony that wove through the room. There was beauty in the shared experience. It reminded me that reconciliation doesn't always seek perfection, but requires vulnerability and openness to growth. Our paths, so differently aligned, had somehow allowed us to converge again, revealing that understanding could form new threads, stitching old pains with the fabric of compassion. By the time the last act settled and the cafe's light began to dim, Jason and I found ourselves enveloped in a tranquil embrace of understanding. As I locked up and waved goodbye to the last lingering customers, who unfurled their stories into the night, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Perhaps, I mused, mistakes didn't have to be anchors but rather lessons gently guiding us toward growth and renewal. With the sweet taste of coffee lingering in my mouth and the warmth of rekindled connection bubbling in my chest, I closed the door behind me, knowing that life would never cease to surprise me with its exquisite range of possibilities. I fell into a contemplative silence as I reflected on the day's unfolding, grateful not just for the cafe, but for the chance encounters and unpredictable paths that lead us back to where we truly belong, whether with friends old or new, wrapped in the comfort of second chances. I never thought my birthday would cause such a stir at work, but here we are. It all started when I was chatting with one of my clients, Louise, during a routine meeting about her project. She's a lovely woman, full of energy, and somehow, amid our usual discussions about budgets and timelines, my birthday came up. I casually mentioned that it was just a week away. I thought nothing of it until I overheard Louise bringing it up to my coworkers later on. That's when I got this sinking feeling in my stomach. It was one thing to share a piece of personal information with a client, it was another to hear her reprimanding my team for not remembering my birthday. "How could you forget? It's the least you could do," she'd exclaimed, her tone laced with disbelief. I could feel my cheeks burning as I listened from the other side of the office, trying to fade into the wall as I felt the weight of each word. "I mean, I like my birthday, but I also know it's not a holiday that everyone should mark on their calendars. I'm not one to seek attention or make a fuss over it," but the embarrassment was magnified when I noticed my coworkers awkwardly shifting in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. It began to snowball into something much bigger, and I couldn't shake the thought that I had triggered this because I had been too open. I considered messaging Louise to downplay her reaction, but then I worried it might just make her think I agreed with her. Either way, I knew I had inadvertently set my coworkers up for an uncomfortable situation, and now I was stuck wishing I had just kept my mouth shut. The office turned into this strange battlefield of awkward smiles and half-hearted birthday wishes, and despite my attempts to mask my feelings, I couldn't help but feel a bit resentful about the whole ordeal. Was I the asshole for sharing my birthday in the first place? Should I have anticipated that it might end up being a spectacle? As I left work that evening, I kept replaying the day in my head, questioning my choice to disclose something so simple yet loaded with social ramifications. I could hear snippets of conversations echoing in my mind, Louise's words haunting me, "You deserve better." Did I? Was it really a big deal for others to forget? I had planned to shrug it off, but now I felt like I'd sparked a drama that could have stayed dormant. Reflecting back now, I realize it was possibly just a lesson in setting boundaries. Maybe I do hold some responsibility for oversharing, but I couldn't shake the notion that others should also respect the space of personal milestones. Fast forward a few days, my coworkers did make an effort to celebrate, albeit small and awkwardly, as they surprised me with a cake during lunch. There were smiles, laughter, and an unspoken truce in the air. But even then, as I blew out the candles, I had the nagging thought of how easily a simple birthday mention could ignite such confusion and pressure. It made me wonder about how often we unintentionally make simple things complicated for ourselves and others, all while trying to connect. So, was I the asshole? Maybe a bit, but we're all learning how to navigate this tangled web of human interactions together, and perhaps that's the real gift we can give each other. The day after my birthday celebration, I came in to find the atmosphere at the office tinged with tension, like the unsettling silence before a storm. My heart sank a bit. I worried that whatever truce we had formed during the cake outing was fragile, and I hadn't fully realized how profound a small detail, my birthday, could disrupt our workplace harmony. The client, a woman named Sandra, had been with our firm for a couple of years, and though her expectations were often daunting, she had become someone I regarded with a mix of respect and caution. By late morning, just as I was settling into yet another round of emails, she called me into her corner office. With her polished, efficient demeanor, she casually mentioned how my coworkers had eviled my birthday but then proceeded to express her utter disapproval of their forgetfulness. It's honestly shocking how they didn't even acknowledge it. Everyone should celebrate those little moments, she said, shaking her head, her tone pointed and almost accusatory. Honestly, I had never thought much about how to gauge others' reactions to my birthday. I disclosed this fact in what I thought was a light-hearted manner, just casual chit-chat, but instead, it felt like I dropped a bomb on her perceptions of my coworkers. The weight of her disappointment settled heavily on my chest, and I stumbled over my words, trying to defend a bunch of well-meaning people who were, admittedly, not always attentive but were far from malicious. As I left her office, an uncomfortable swirl of emotions bubbled inside me. I wondered where negligence ended and ignorance began. Did I have a right to be upset that they hadn't celebrated? Sure, but spending my birthday celebrating with cake brought me joy, not resentment. Still, her words echoed in my mind throughout the day, creating an uneasy tension that gnawed at the back of my brain. As the week progressed, I noticed Sandra growing more agitated with my team. Small complaints escalated into dramatic statements. "I expect better," she said during one of our weekly project meetings, rubbing her temple as if the world's woes lay on her shoulders. My coworkers exchanged glances, their unease felt like a strained rope, nearly ready to snap. I found myself in a precarious position, loving my team while also recognizing Sandra's discomfort, which had blossomed into an incongruous empathy. But did I have a stake in this? Should I have kept my mouth shut about my birthday? It was as if I had unintentionally thrust myself into the role of mediator, which only amplified the urgency of the whole situation. I realized that this spiral could only worsen if my team wanted a solid working relationship with someone as pivotal as Sandra. So, out of sheer desperation, I decided it was time to bring everyone together for an honest chat. I couldn't let this disruption continue swirling without some clarity. I called a meeting, not in the conference room, but in the cozy local cafe down the street, an escape from the intense corporate atmosphere. As I spoke, voicing my feelings about the situation, there was an unexpected silence. I could see the light of recognition flicker in my coworkers' eyes. I was no longer just airing a grievance but revealing my vulnerability. They shared how they sometimes felt lost in the busyness and, admittedly, how they had forgotten dates of significance in their own lives too. It was a moment of liberation, like we were all unwrapping a big fabric blanket that had been suffocating us. Together, we acknowledged that while we didn't celebrate my birthday as we could have, it didn't define how we valued each other. The conversation deepened, evolving into an understanding that we were all learning to respect one another's feelings and acknowledge celebrations big and small. Afterward, I had a real talk with Sandra. It wasn't easy, but I decided to be upfront. I explained that while I appreciated her taking an interest in my birthday, I also saw how this had inadvertently strained relationships within my team. To my surprise, she listened. The hardened front softened just a bit. She admitted it had struck a nerve, realizing she often placed high expectations not just onto others, but on herself as well. It was a reckoning for both of us, one that we navigated into understanding rather than confrontation. And so, while my birthday had sparked something unsettling, it also unearthed an opportunity for connection. As the days turned into weeks, something shifted. There was less tension, more laughter in the office, and even hints of planned celebrations for upcoming occasions. I learned that sometimes being the catalyst for tough conversations wasn't so much about assuming a role of blame or validation but about opening a door for understanding. I felt less like I was wading through unsteady emotional waters and more like I was standing on solid ground. Reflecting on it now, maybe there was never a concrete answer to whether I was the asshole. Maybe what mattered was the fact that we all had to communicate, flawed as we might be, and through that, we grew. I think we're all figuring it out, and who knows? Perhaps the next birthday will be more about the celebration of connection than a single forgotten date. As the weeks rolled on after that birthday, I felt a subtle shift not just within myself, but in the dynamics of the office. It was as if we had collectively let out a breath we didn't even know we were holding. Conversations became easier, lighter, and I could see my coworkers making a real effort to connect beyond just the sterile exchange of emails and deadlines. We had been teetering on the edge of a delicate balance, and somehow, that cake had nudged us back into a healthier rhythm. Here's the thing, I'd always been the quiet one, dragging my feet into the background while my louder colleagues basked in the spotlight. But in this newfound openness, I found myself stepping forward more, sharing ideas during our meetings, even leading a brainstorming session one chilly Thursday morning. The sense of camaraderie grew, and for once, I didn't dread Monday mornings. It was like we were tuning up a symphony, each of us finding our notes and harmonizing together, a far cry from where we had been just the month before. Then came Tasha's email. She was one of the most ambitious project managers I'd ever met, a real firecracker. Her bright personality could light up even the dullest meeting, and maybe because I respected her so much, it stung more when I saw the subject line, "Can I ask a favor?" I braced myself as I clicked it open. She needed help preparing for a presentation, a significant pitch to our higher-ups. The kind of deal that could elevate our entire team. Despite my earlier hesitation, I felt a spark of energy flow through me with the prospect of collaborating with her. There was a boldness in saying yes that I hadn't recognized before. We spent hours piecing together our ideas, and as we worked, I shared a little more of myself, my thoughts, my fears about failing, the weight of those uncelebrated years. "This is good stuff, you know?" Tasha said, her eyes lighting up as she read through the bullet points I had drafted. "You should be more vocal about this stuff, honestly. Don't wait for the others to notice you." I remember chuckling, feeling a warmth spread across my face. After our session, she scooted her chair closer, as if she was initiating a secret mission. "Since you're, actually celebrating birthdays now, what are your thoughts about throwing a little office party next month?" Her words lingered long after I left the conference room. Doubts flitted through my mind. What if it was received poorly? What if everyone forgot again? But I silenced those whispers. I wanted to embrace this new sense of connection, to lean into the unpretentious chaos of birthdays and celebrate the chaotic beauty of our imperfect human existence. So I sent out a quirky, light-hearted invitation to the team, asking them to participate in what I cheekily called my half-birthday bash because, sure, why not make it more absurd? I even set up a small wishing wall with sticky notes where everyone could leave behind little notes of encouragement or inside jokes. When the day arrived, there was laughter and genuine excitement. We all wore colorful party hats, and for a moment, none of us were focused on deadlines or corporate structures. We were just a bunch of folks sharing laughter and memories. As we all gathered around the table, I realized I wasn't solely championing the significance of birthdays for my own sake anymore. I was celebrating our efforts to connect in ways that transcended just remembering a date. The simple act of showing up for one another, of taking interest, of daring to be vulnerable amidst laughter and goofy decorations, it meant something far more poignant than I could have articulated a few months ago. I watched as my colleagues swapped stories and shared awkward moments, each little tidbit weaving us closer together. And as I blew out candles again, half a year's worth of dreams and aspirations, I knew that we had moved beyond being just coworkers. We were becoming something more like a family. So, was I the asshole for mentioning my birthday? Maybe, maybe not. In the end, I realized it was never just about that single cake or who remembered what date. It was about giving ourselves permission to be seen, to be celebrated, and to navigate the complexities of our relationships. Maybe, just maybe, the real lesson I learned wasn't about birthdays at all. It was about the richness of presence, of kindness, and allowing each other to grow, one imperfect step at a time. In recent months, a strange sense of unease has settled in like a thick fog over my small suburban town, wrapping around the familiar streets and houses, suffocating the vibrant spirit we all once took for granted. I suppose I've always considered myself a typical American, blissfully navigating through life with a steady job at the local library, sharing coffee breaks with my fellow workers, and spending weekends stargazing in my backyard with my son, Ethan. But now, as I find myself scrolling through online discussions on platforms like Reddit, I can't help but wonder, how does it truly feel to be American these days? It started with simple conversations with friends, who seemed more reclusive than usual, avoiding discussions that led into anything resembling politics or current events. But then came the day when Ethan approached me, his young brow furrowed, asking, "Mom, why are so many people arguing and fighting on the internet?" His innocent question hit me like a punch to the gut, and I mentally scrambled for an answer that would reassure him. You see, I didn't have an immediate response. All I could muster were vague remarks about differing opinions and the complexities of the world. As the days went by, I noticed the tension amongst the community growing. People would look past each other in the grocery store, the air thick with a palpable sense of frustration, and even the town's annual fall festival felt muted, as though joy had taken a backseat. I often sat on my porch, watching neighbors walk their dogs, and imagined sharing a friendly chat, yet it seemed like an impossible task to breach the uncomfortable distance that had formed between us. Then one evening, as I was stirring up a pot of chili, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Henderson from next door, her face creased with worry. She asked if we could talk, and I've never seen her look so vulnerable. As we sat on the front steps, she revealed how scared she felt for her grandchildren, growing up in a world that seemed increasingly divided and hostile. It stirred something in me, a delicate yearning for connection amidst chaos, and without thinking, I confessed my own worries about Ethan, sharing my uncertainty about how to explain the complexities that surrounded us. To my surprise, she responded with a softness that I had almost forgotten existed, and what started as a somber conversation about the state of the world slowly transformed into a cathartic sharing of hopes, fears, and our shared belief in raising a kinder, more empathetic generation. Over the next few weeks, we founded a small weekly gathering in our backyards, inviting other parents, feeling the warmth of camaraderie blossom where once there was trepidation. Each meeting offered us a chance to express our concerns, share our joys, and it felt as if we were knitting a safety net out of laughter and camaraderie. As the seasons changed and we transitioned into winter, we exchanged stories under the street lamp's soft glow, occasionally touching upon our thoughts about the country and the constraints we felt entwined in. That sense of community was reflected in the spirit of each gathering. Among the laughter and shared snacks, we gradually built the courage to discuss, listen, and understand each other, igniting flickers of hope in our hearts. I found comfort in knowing I wasn't alone in navigating this tangled web. Instead, we were hand in hand, illuminating each other's paths. With time, I realized that being American had shifted significantly for me, not in a grand, political way, but on a more intimate, personal level. In seeking connection during turbulent times, I had embraced a sense of belonging that made me proud despite the chaos outside our doors. I often reflect on that initial worry Ethan expressed, knowing it ignited a series of fortifying conversations that transformed our little town. As we gathered around warm lights and shared pies, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me. Perhaps all it required was vulnerability and openness to rebuild our sense of community. So, how does it feel to be American these days? It feels like leaning into the discomfort, fostering connections, and believing in the shared humanity that binds us, despite the discord swirling around us. It's not perfect, and the journey is ongoing, but I've come to learn that togetherness, even amid uncertainty, can pave a path towards healing. Update: just last week, we had our regular gathering and asked everyone if they wanted to keep meeting, even after the holidays. Our conversation was filled with excitement, and we decided to start a community project where we write letters to local lawmakers about our hopes for the future, inviting our children to participate. The response was overwhelming. Who would have thought that a little chili and some honest conversations could evolve into such a collective purpose? Looking back, I see that this experience not only helped to mend the rifts in our community but also rekindled faith in the possibility of change, one small bond at a time. As we embarked on this new journey of engagement, I often found myself in the company of friends who were once mere acquaintances, and each gathering felt like a gentle tug on the frayed edges of my heart. The project soon transformed into a monthly affair, a sanctuary where voices that had long been hushed could finally speak out. Our letters became vessels of hope and dreams, carrying the weight of our children's futures along with our own aspirations. I remember the first time we gathered to write together. The air was thick with anticipation and warmth, a poignant reminder that shared spaces could replace walls. We sat around folding tables under the soft glow of string lights, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the crisp scent of paper and ink. Children laughed and played nearby, occasionally sneaking glances at their parents, curiosity sparkling in their eyes like stars just before dusk. As I helped my son spell out his thoughts on education, life lessons chin deep in youthful wisdom, I felt something shift within me, a nostalgic warmth growing in the pit of my stomach. There was a beauty in the banality of it all. As we shared stories about our daily lives, the burdens of our individual struggles felt lighter, turned into fleeting whispers between friends. Each letter we penned took on a life of its own, a story of resilience wrapped in the inked hopes of a community eager to be heard. We began sending our letters not just to lawmakers, but to local newspapers, transforming our words into a symphony of resolve and solidarity. Slowly but surely, our group started finding its voice, an echo of thought that resonated far beyond our suburban corner. There were moments of doubt, of course, conversations about the intricacies of social change and the daunting nature of governmental responses made us question our impact. Would our words even matter? But with each passing month, responses from lawmakers began pouring in, each letter sparking a flicker of hope that urged us forward. One particularly chilly evening, we received a response that still brings goosebumps to my arms. It was from a state senator, acknowledging our letters, commending our efforts, and inviting us to a community forum to discuss our ideas further. I could hardly breathe as I read it aloud to the group, faces lighting up with an electrifying mix of disbelief and excitement. Our meetings became not just a hub for discussion but a safe harbor, a place for unfiltered honesty where parents could voice fears about the rising costs of living, and children could dream of safer schools and brighter futures. It was cathartic, to put it mildly. There was a sense of purpose that had eluded many of us for years. By engaging with our lawmakers and pushing for change, we were igniting a passion for advocacy within our kids, teaching them that democracy was not a distant concept but a tool within their reach. As the end of the year approached, we held a holiday gathering that felt less like a project meeting and more like a warm family reunion. We decorated the community center room with handmade ornaments, each one a testament to the unique hopes and dreams of local families. Laughter and joy filled the air, a stark contrast to the noise of division that once echoed throughout our neighborhood. The culmination of our efforts, a special letter addressed to the entire community, was displayed prominently on the main bulletin board, a beautifully penned summary of the ideals we stood for and an invitation for others to join us. When I stepped back to observe the smiles spreading across so many familiar faces, the laughter of children echoing like the sweetest harmonies, I realized how far we had come. In channeling a desire for better, we had stumbled into an unexpected camaraderie, forging relationships that challenged our preconceived notions and quietly reshaped our worldview. I didn't just see neighbors anymore, I saw friends, allies in a journey that sought something greater than ourselves. Months passed, and with each communication we exchanged, I felt lighter. I had wrestled with the notion that being American in this climate felt isolating, a relentless tide of division pulling us apart. Yet, in creating this project, I had discovered slices of hope rooted in unity and shared purpose. We might not solve all the world's problems overnight, but we had fostered a sense of belonging and possibility in a way that I hadn't realized I needed. Reflecting back, I now understood that being American today was not just about grappling with the headlines or the chaos that often filled our screens. It was about connecting with those around us, sharing our aspirations, and standing together for what we believed in. I found solace in community, the belief that change could be cultivated in small moments, like taking the time to listen, to reach out, and to warm a neighbor's heart over a pot of chili. So, as the seasons turned and our project continued to flourish, I welcomed each new day with an open heart and a mind eager to listen, grateful that sometimes it is in the collective that we find our individual strength. Update: just a few weeks after our final gathering of the year, the senator invited our group to the state capitol. It was a surreal experience, sitting in a large conference room surrounded by those once deemed unreachable. We presented our letters, our hopes, and our children's dreams. The room was charged with a palpable energy, one that urged us onward into uncharted territory. As we left, the weight of responsibility settled comfortably on my shoulders, replacing the burden of isolation I had carried for so long. It felt as if we weren't just faces in the crowd anymore, we were part of something larger, a movement fueled by unwavering belief in our ability to instigate meaningful change. Who knows what paths lie ahead or what stories remain to be written, but I am learning to embrace each moment, knowing that the journey often begins with a simple act of connection and a shared bowl of chili. As the weeks turned into months, each meeting brought more people and more stories to our gathering. We began to see familiar faces, those of the baker from down the street, the retired teacher who once ran the local after-school program, and even the barista from the cafe where I used to grab my morning coffee in isolation. The warmth of our little coalition created an inviting space that felt like home. We established a rhythm. Each session began with the aromatic scent of chili simmering on the stove, vegetarian for those who preferred it, and transformed into an informal think tank where ideas flowed as freely as laughter. I discovered that sharing our individual stories over a warm meal could illuminate the common threads woven through our lives, revealing shared hopes, fears, and dreams. One evening, a young mother named Sarah brought her daughter, a bright-eyed girl with wild curly hair, who approached me with wide eyes, curious. "Why are you all writing letters?" she asked innocently, clutching a crayon in her tiny fist. That question lingered in my mind long after the evening ended. Her simple curiosity reminded me of the impact we were having not just on each other, but on a generation that stood to inherit our future. So, we decided to invite children to contribute their thoughts as well, incorporating a segment where they could draw or write about their hopes and dreams for the community. Each week, the role of our project expanded. The letters we penned soon adorned the walls of the local government office, becoming a collection of voices, and when they received responses, they were read aloud with pride, each reply igniting sparks of hope within us. This entire process transformed not just our community, but me personally. Gone was the uncertainty I once felt. In its place grew a newfound sense of purpose that was both invigorating and humbling. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. As we became more visible, we also became subjects of scrutiny. Some in the community disapproved of us channeling our grievances and pleading for change publicly, arguing that we were merely stirring up trouble. We faced backlash from some who believed our efforts contradicted the established way of life, and a few called us naive dreamers, unable to see how deeply entrenched problems were. It wasn't easy to hear harsh comments and judgment from those who used to share our space. Feelings of resignation would often sneak in at night when I found myself alone, wondering if our efforts could really redirect the course of our local narrative. But every time I felt the weight of doubt creeping in, I'd remind myself of Sarah's question and our group's diverse collection of letters and drawings. They became my anchor. I learned to channel that anxiety into pushing harder, leaning into the discomfort and turning it into a conversation rather than conflict. To my surprise, some of those who had initially criticized began to join our discussions, more curious than combative. There was a palpable shift towards understanding, and the ties that once felt fragile began to mend. Eventually, we organized a community event called A Day for Tomorrow, which showcased the letters in a public exhibit, bringing together art, music, and collaboration. Families filled the park, bright colors of happiness around each booth. Kids colored with crayons, each drawing adding bursts of life to the drab, gray spaces that had grown all too familiar. When the sun dipped low in the sky, it cast a warm glow over our gathering, and I felt a profound sense of hope wash over me. That evening, as I sat on the grass, listening to the giddy laughter mixed with hopeful chatter, I understood that the journey wouldn't be over after one event. Our story was unfolding in chapters, each page filled with community, compassion, and connection. Reflecting on this experience now, I hold a profound gratitude for those early chilly conversations that started it all. What began as a simple gathering transformed into a lifeline for many of us. We all learned that embracing change doesn't demand grand gestures but can spring from shared meals, laughter, and understanding. As we continued to write letters and draw dreams for the future, I felt a quiet strength, a collective pulse, propelling us forward. Yes, being American in these times can feel isolating and frustrating, but it is also filled with possibilities forged in the fires of connection, clarity, and community. I've come to realize that every bond we create, no matter how small, moves us one step closer to a better tomorrow, encouraging each of us to ask not just how it feels, but how we can actively shape the narrative together. And as life often does, it nudged us along, never letting us stay stagnant for too long. As I'd sit pondering how much had changed, I realized I was no longer carrying a weight but rather a flame, igniting others along the way. As we continued sharing our dreams, who knows how far this flame could travel. I never expected my career as a mental health therapist would introduce me to something so unsettling, something so beyond my understanding that it would leave an indelible mark on my life. I've spent years working in various clinics, hearing people pour out their fears, anxieties, and traumas, yet I never prepared myself for the day I would meet Drew, my new patient who quite literally lived in a basement. It started on a cloudy Tuesday, just a typical day at the office, when I received an unexpected referral to see a patient in dire need. The organization informed me that the new patient was a young man in his late 20s, living at his parents' house, but the caveat here was that he had taken residence in their damp, dark basement. Perhaps I sensed the curiosity mingling with apprehension as I entered that basement for the first time, descending the rickety stairs under the dim light fixture that flickered ominously. When I first laid eyes on Drew, sitting curled up in the worn armchair littered with mismatched blankets and half-finished novels, he didn't seem out of place at all. He looked like one of those characters, deeply intriguing, yet profoundly damaged. As we started our sessions, I learned more about him. His voice was soft yet unwavering, full of wisdom that belied his years. Drew revealed he was an aspiring writer, but his creativity was stifled not only by his crippling anxiety but a family history riddled with mental health struggles that seemed to hover over him like a thick fog. The reason he confined himself to the basement was twofold. 1, he felt safer from his overbearing parents, and 2, it had become a sanctuary where he could tiptoe along the fragile line between reality and his vivid imagination. Slowly, week after week, he unspooled the terrible tapestry of his life, and with every session, I felt more connected to him. I, too, grappled with a blend of empathy and unease, wondering if I was genuinely offering him the help he needed or simply peering into a disquieting parallel of my own existence. His stories had begun to weave themselves into my mind, and a mysterious bond developed between us, shrouded in mutual vulnerability and unspoken truths. In my gut, though, a nagging doubt began to creep in: had I crossed an unspoken line? The basement was replete with shadows that twisted and turned in an unsettling dance, and as I opened the door to leave every session, I felt as if I was stepping into a realm that was both captivating and deeply forbidding. One week, as Drew recounted a particularly harrowing tale about a character of his creation that mirrored his struggles, his energy shifted. There was something in his eyes then, a flicker, maybe of madness or sheer genius, it was hard to tell. I found myself holding my breath, sensing that I had stumbled into a fracture of his soul I wasn't fully prepared for. He mentioned a night he felt compelled to protect himself, drawn into a world where he blurred the lines between fiction and reality. He spoke of the basement in such vivid detail that I almost believed it concealed a world of its own. The conversation lingered like an echo in my mind, unsettling and captivating, and as we closed our session, he handed me a yellowed piece of paper filled with scrawled notes and sketches. "It's a character chart for my next story," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "But it's more than that, it's about me." I felt like a voyeur peering at the fragile flaps of his psyche exposed, and I saw visions of that basement, full of shadows, solace, and maybe something sinister, a vessel for both creativity and torment. In the days that followed, I found myself lost in thought about the stories he told and the meanings hidden beneath his words. One rainy evening, driven by impulse, I decided to venture to his home once more, convinced to understand the space that shaped Drew. As I approached the house, its haunted facade loomed in the dim light. The cracks in the walls seemed to mirror the fractures within the man I had been trying to help. I knocked nervously, and his mother opened the door with a distant look in her eyes, as if too lost in her own thoughts to notice my presence. She led me down to the basement without a word, and once again, I was swept into that dim world filled with shadows and silence. Drew was seated exactly where I'd last seen him, yet there was an air of something different, a thick silence that hung between us like a taut string about to break. He offered me the chair, but I hesitated, suddenly aware that the weight of the room had shifted. "How did you even know to come here?" he asked, his tone low, almost cautious. I explained my worry, my need to understand him better, but the moment my voice faltered, I felt the unease ripple through the space. Something was wrong. That paper he'd handed me was not merely character sketches, they were intricate maps, ones I had overlooked. I leaned closer, trying to absorb every detail, my heart racing as I realized they depicted not just his stories but a labyrinth that mirrored his mind, a prison where his fears came to life. "Drew," I began, my voice quaking, "is there something else you need to share?" He looked up then, his eyes wide as if a veil had been lifted, revealing something buried deep. "I was trying to escape it," he confessed, his hand shaking slightly. "The basement, my mind, it's all the same." And there it was, the roots of his anxiety twisted into the mere act of climbing stairs, as if the very act of going beyond those four walls would unravel the stories he encapsulated. The moment we stood there, surrounded by the artifacts of his life, I realized I was standing at the precipice of something profound. I couldn't help but feel that we had both stepped into a world where compassion danced with darkness, where understanding intertwined with fear. I left that night, my mind racing with thoughts of our conversation, infuriated with myself. I had come seeking answers but found more questions, knots of confusion wrapping deeper around my heart. In the weeks that followed, our sessions transformed. I learned as much from him as he from me. I began to see that the basement was not just a physical space but a realm for healing, a canvas for his creativity and his pain, pushing me deeper into my own fears about boundaries and the nature of care. As I continued to support him in constructing bridges back to the wider world, I realized that sometimes from the deepest shadows, creativity can bloom. What initially seemed a prison became a place of liberation in Drew's mind. Drew eventually moved out of that basement, transitioning into his own apartment, but he never fully left that space behind. Occasionally, I find a bolt of vivid inspiration in his stories. They resonate in me like echoes of a song forgotten. The basement was an invitation to ponder how darkness and light can coalesce, shaping our narratives in ways we might never anticipate. Months later, I returned for one last session, filled with pride and bittersweet nostalgia. As we closed the door behind us, I realized we had woven a tapestry of healing from the threads of his fears. Drew offered me a handwritten letter before I left, expressing thanks that resonated with the warmth shared in those moments, leaving me with a heart full of wonder for the stories that define us. I don't know if I'll ever truly untangle the threads of our journey, but maybe, just maybe, those tales will continue to twist and turn through the shadows, guiding others home. The basement may have held its secrets, but our shared journey had birthed an unexpected friendship, reminding me that healing often blooms in the unlikeliest of places. And as I walked away, I felt an odd sense of closure, both for him and for myself, marveling at how connections can shift the boundaries of understanding. Somehow, through all the chaos, a sense of hope emerged. Life moves forward, often in the quietest of ways, from the shadows of our deepest fears. As I stepped out of that dimly lit basement for the last time, the scent of damp earth and stale memories clung to my clothes, a reminder of all that had transpired within the confines of those four walls. The late afternoon sun poured down, warm and inviting, contrasting sharply with the chill of the basement I'd just emerged from. It felt surreal, leaving behind a world that had unfolded so intricately, yet contained within such a compact space. I glanced back at the windowless facade, wondering how many secrets it still held, and how many more stories could be carved from its shadowy existence. My mind drifted to Jacob, the patient who had inadvertently become my confidant, revealing pieces of himself that seemed more like fragments of a puzzle than complete thoughts. Every session had brought its own revelations, but it was during our last visit that I learned the most about him, not through his words, but through the silence that lingered between us. In that silence, I realized the burden he carried. It wasn't merely the shame of his living conditions or the burden of his past that weighed him down, but the profound loneliness that accompanied his struggle. We had both used therapy to weave a thread of understanding, but perhaps it was more than that. It had become our lifeline in a stormy sea of isolation. It was that very humanity that connected us, more genuine than any scripted psychobabble. Even after our sessions ended, his voice echoed in my thoughts, especially his final words, which felt like both a closure and an invitation. "We're all just stories waiting to be told," he had said, a slight smile breaking the heavy gravity of his usual demeanor. I had left him with an assurance that he would never be alone again in this, that I would carry his story with me, sharing it in my own therapeutic journey. The ride home was filled with a medley of emotions swirling in my chest. I drove through the streets, watching life unfold in front of me, a chaotic dance that seemed so vibrant compared to the stillness I had just left behind. Children rode their bicycles, adults chatted idly on sidewalks, and the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. It struck me that everyone carried their own hidden struggles, akin to Jacob's. I could see snippets of their own stories passing by. The thought made me reflect on the inevitability of connection and how lives intertwine, often without first realizing our shared burdens. Late that evening, after a simple dinner of takeout sushi, I found myself drawn to my journal, compelled to somehow capture the essence of Jacob's journey. As I scribbled, I felt the weight of each word, the importance of preserving both his vulnerability and strength. I wrote about the laughter we shared, how he revealed fragments of his past in the safety of our sessions, the way he cracked jokes about his ex-girlfriends who lived in the realm of his memories, and how he took each poke of humor as a sliver to cut through his despair. With every stroke of the pen, I felt a release. I was processing his story while weaving it with my own appreciation for the resilience of the human spirit. In the weeks that followed, I kept Jacob in my thoughts more than I had anticipated. Each day seemed to bring a new layer to my understanding of what it meant to acknowledge someone's struggles and how much healing could stem from this acknowledgement. I had begun to reach out, sharing snippets of his journey at professional gatherings, using his anonymity wisely but ensuring his message was clear. Sometimes, hope is found in the most unexpected places, I would say, letting my colleagues know that each patient holds a labyrinth of experiences waiting to be navigated. As I moved through the rhythms of my life, the moments of doubt and worry echoed the earlier feelings of uncertainty I'd felt before meeting Jacob. It made me wonder if I was truly helping others in my practice, or merely dancing around the fringes of healing. But every time I remembered Jacob's laugh, that clear, light laugh that echoed in the depths of despair, I knew then that every patient had their own story, a narrative that deserved to be heard and, at times, passed forward. And so, I learned to walk with a lighter heart, carrying Jacob's strength alongside my professional insights. It was a role we both had unknowingly embraced. I was his watcher and he was my guide. As the boundaries blurred, I realized that each connection I made afterward felt richer, more vibrant, echoing the lessons I had learned in that basement. Months passed, and while I never stopped checking in on him, the visits dwindled. His progress had become a blossoming journey of his own. One evening, just as the winter frost began to settle in, I received a message from him. It was a simple image, a photo of himself standing outside a brightened door, grinning into the camera. I got a place above ground, it read, just a tiny studio with a view of the stars. In that moment, my heart soared with pride. Perhaps the stories held within our shadows weren't meant to disappear, after all. Instead, they became guides, reminding us that, together, we could traverse even the darkest of paths, eventually finding the light. The days that followed that heartfelt message felt lighter, almost as if the chill of winter was merely a backdrop to the warmth blossoming within me. As a therapist, I'd always known that change was possible, but witnessing it firsthand in someone so close to the edge of despair was different. It was invigorating, a testament to the human spirit's resilience. Encouraged by his message, I found myself reflecting on our sessions together, how his quiet determination had sparked something deep within me. He'd shared stories of his past, his childhood and dreams, woven with threads of despair that had once held him captive in that dim basement. Yet somehow, he had begun to untangle those knots, seeking a life beyond the confines of the life he'd constructed. I wanted to see him thrive in his new world, to bask in the glow of his hard-fought freedom. I put aside my research for the day, eager to reach out and arrange a visit. When the day finally came, I felt an unusual mixture of excitement and nervousness, a tangible thrill coursing through my veins as I rang the doorbell of his new place. The tiny studio indeed had a view of the stars, twinkling brilliantly against the velvet night sky, and it felt miraculous to stand in this space that smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. When he opened the door, the joy in his eyes mirrored the vastness above. "Welcome to my new chapter," he said, his voice steady, yet laced with an undercurrent of disbelief. We spent hours talking about his transition, the spooky stories he had filled our sessions with, and how he was learning to embrace both the light and dark within himself. The vulnerability we shared deepened our bond beautifully. I was no longer just his therapist but a friend, a confidant. As the night wore on, he took me to the small balcony where we could see the stars in all their glory. He pointed to one specific star that shone brighter than the others, calling it his milestone star, a symbol of his journey toward healing. I stood beside him, aware that my heart was expanding with every word we exchanged. It was during those moments of genuine connection, immersed in laughter and shared silence, that I realized how much his struggle had mirrored my own. As a therapist, I had also escaped the shadows, my own fears of inadequacy and the burden of expectations plaguing my mind. Being present with him allowed me to confront my own journey, helping me understand that healing happens collectively as much as it does individually. After what felt like both an eternity and a fleeting instant, the chill of the night crept in, and we both knew it was time for me to go. However, just before I left, He grabbed my arm gently. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." I felt a lump in my throat but managed to smile, grateful for the role I had played in his transformation. As I headed home, I couldn't shake the feeling of euphoria lifting my spirits higher. I had walked with him through his shadows, and now, I looked forward to witnessing the glow of his newfound hope light up his world. Not long after, I received another message from him. "I feel like I can take on anything now," he shared, mixed with pictures of him smiling with new friends in a local cafe. I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming pride swell within me. But as the weeks unfolded, I realized that there was still a lot of work to be done, not on his part, but on mine. I began to understand that sharing my own struggles could help others, just as I had seen him blossoming without the constraints of his past fears. And as winter melted into a warmer spring, I started to pen my own stories, some connected to my journey as a therapist, others reflecting my personal challenges. I found an unexpected community online, and in sharing, I diminished the power of those shadows that often tried to creep back in. While he stepped into life above ground, I was taking my own journey into the light. Together, we became beacons of hope, finding solace in our shared vulnerabilities and kindness for each other's pain. As we continued to share updates, our conversations illuminated the understanding that healing didn't have a finish line. It was messy, complex, and defined by moments of triumph and despair, but embracing those moments in our lives could lead not just to personal growth, but also to connection. So, when I reflect back on that basement and the struggles that transpired, I now see it as a sacred ground, one that birthed friendship, understanding, and the profound realization that the stories we carry don't just belong to us, they are threads woven into the fabric of humanity itself, binding us in our shared experiences. And sometimes, just sometimes, they bring us the light we so desperately seek. I sat on our faded couch, the kind that had seen better days, staring blankly at the coffee table littered with wedding invitations. My husband, Kyle, had just received one from his sister, and the moment he read the name of the venue, the same place where we'd had our own wedding, the nostalgia washed over me like a tidal wave. But it quickly faded, replaced by an unsettling rush of anxiety. You see, Kyle hadn't spoken to his sister in 2 years. It wasn't one of those petty squabbles that could be brushed aside, it was a feud that began when she belittled our decision to have a child early in our marriage, telling us we were ruining our lives. The words had cut deep, especially because I had struggled with infertility and felt vulnerable in ways I couldn't vocalize. Now, here we were, standing on the precipice of a decision that made my stomach churn. As I watched him thumb through the invitation, I felt this surge of protectiveness rising within me. I knew that if he went, there was a good chance it would escalate into something ugly, and I didn't want to see him hurt again. I hesitated, then finally voiced my concern, choosing my words carefully. "Are you really planning on going?" I asked, trying to gauge his intentions. His expression shifted from excitement to uncertainty, and for a split second, I saw the flicker of ambivalence play across his face, a battle between the desire to reconcile and the fear of rejection that had haunted him for years. I took a breath and laid out my feelings, layering them with severity. He needed to understand that inviting old wounds to a celebration might not be as festive as it seemed. His eyes narrowed, a shadow of disappointment shadowed his features. "So, you want me to just stay home? Don't you want me to try?" The tension thickened in the air, I felt it tightening around us like a noose. I took a moment, biting my lip, knowing I had to be careful. "It's not just about you, Kyle. It's about protecting what we've built together. You can't just walk back into her life as if nothing happened, and I don't want to be there when it all falls apart." The room filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could read his frustration in the way his fingers tapped nervously against the armrest, and it killed me. I never wanted to feel like the villain in this story. I worried that by suggesting he shouldn't go, I was shoving him into a corner, making him choose between family and our life together. It was a painful realization, but the possibility of joy turning into chaos loomed larger than any hope of reconciliation. After a long pause, Kyle finally stood up, the invitation still clutched in his hand, and I watched him walk over to the window, staring out at the street below as if trying to find answers in the mundane world outside. I felt a pang of guilt. Was I really the one keeping him from healing? Or was I merely preserving the peace we had fought so hard to achieve? The truth is, there was no clear answer. In the end, he decided not to go, a choice I silently hoped had been for the best, even if it meant reducing his relationship with his sister to a flickering flame instead of a raging fire. This decision hung over us for weeks, And while it seemed right at the time, it brought a fresh wave of uncertainty. Had I done the right thing? I wished for the distance between him and his sister to dissolve, if only they could talk openly, if only she could see him for who he was now. A few days later, we received a phone call from her. Kyle answered with a mix of hope and trepidation, and I could hear her voice on the other end, barely above a whisper. I held my breath, wishing I could take the weight of this moment away from him. It turned into a long conversation, one I eavesdropped on while pretending to be busy in the kitchen. He was answering her questions cautiously, articulating the hurt without putting blame. When he finally hung up, his eyes were a mixture of relief and residual hurt. "We're going to try again," he said, and I smiled, not because the resolution was solid but because there was a glimmer of hope we hadn't foreseen. With every turn, every moment spent grappling with complex emotions, I realized love isn't just about the easy choices but also about the difficult conversations. A few weeks later, he joined me at the table while I was sorting the wedding invites again. "I think we should go to the wedding," he said softly, and panic flared in my chest. I didn't respond right away. Was I really okay with this? The truth is, I had no idea what the right answer was, but I knew it was a path we'd have to navigate together, no matter how thorny it might be. For what felt like an eternity, I stared at the wedding invites scattered across the table like a map to uncharted territory. Each envelope seemed to pulse with unvoiced questions and unacknowledged tensions, echoing the scramble of my thoughts. "Go to the wedding?" I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady despite the whirl of emotions churning inside me. In my mind, I could hear the punctuated laughter of my sister-in-law, Jessica, as I remembered last Thanksgiving, when the family had gathered together, and the warmth of those moments contrasted sharply with the chill that seemed to hang over everything since her engagement. She had never liked me, and I certainly hadn't warmed up to her. My husband, Daniel, had always been the centerpiece of that family, towering tall and sunny, expertly navigating the waves of familial drama with grace. And now, here we were. "You know they'll probably all side with her," I said, the weight of my concern sinking into the space between us. "They'll think I'm just being difficult, as usual. What if we don't go and it pushes you further away from them?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I had come to identify with his frustration. "Maybe it's time to confront all that. You're not difficult for wanting to protect your peace." "Protect my peace? I'm not some damsel in distress." The echoes of fighting for my own self-worth danced in my mind, and I hesitated, staring down at the invites again. This wasn't just about a single day, it was about the larger conversation of who we were becoming, together and apart. I felt the moment catch in my throat, the vulnerability hammering at my walls. What happens when you love someone but also know their family, and their history, could drown you in a sea of tides you couldn't escape? "I just want us to be okay," I finally whispered, my heart heavy with doubt. Daniel's expression softened, and in those quiet seconds, I could see the boy who first kissed me under the stars, that same ember of hope flickering in his eyes. "We will be. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The words wrapped around me, a fragile lifeline, and for an instant, I believed in them. But then, silence slipped in, thick and unyielding, filling the cracks of our conversation. The day of the wedding dawned with a mix of excitement and dread. Clouds hung low in the sky, mirroring my uncertainty. As we dressed, I caught myself catching fleeting glimpses of Daniel, adorned in a suit that brought out the shine in his eyes. It was familiar yet filled with an edge of anxiety. I wondered, was he wearing it for them or for us? When we finally arrived at the venue, the air grew heavy with the scent of blooming flowers and inevitable conflict. Jessica was radiant, a knockout in ivory, and even through my resentment, I could feel the magnetic energy she exuded. As I stepped inside, the room seemed to spin. I could see the waves of family swirling around Daniel, pulling him into the currents of chatter. Each hug felt like a mugging, the warmth that enveloped him stealing pieces of the man I loved. "You made it," one of her relatives exclaimed, and I could tell the words were coated with a hint of surprise. The judgment was palpable, I could feel it prickling against my skin. I held my breath, fighting the urge to turn and flee. I lingered at the edges, watching Daniel greet family members with his disarming charm, but I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of his life. It was only a tentative hey from Jessica when she caught sight of me that anchored me back into reality. "Glad you came," she said, her smile tight and rehearsed, a contrast to the joyous atmosphere surrounding her. I nodded, feeling every moment stinging. Just when I was about to retreat to the bar, Daniel's laughter cut through the noise, a warm ember in the chilly distance. I stepped forward instinctively, drowning my insecurities in that familiar sound. The evening unfolded like a slow, painful dance. Each conversation felt like a tightrope walk, balanced between civility and rising tension. I could see Daniel start to look wearier as the hours ticked by, and I wondered if he, too, felt the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Eventually, he found me by the appetizer table, his eyes searching mine for solace. "Let's step outside," he suggested, and his voice was firm, like a life buoy in a storm. We walked into the cool evening, the world outside humming softly, and I felt my shoulders drop just a bit. "I don't want to keep feeling like this," he confessed, hands tucked into his pockets, staring at the ground. "Being here, it's exhausting." My heart quickened. "So, what do we do about that?" I asked, feeling both terrified and relieved at the possibility of us figuring this out together. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the chaos of the wedding faded into the background. "I guess we just need to make sure we don't lose what we've built," he said, his tone rich with resolve. The wedding buzzed behind us, merging into a muffled noise as I grasped the gravity of his words. We were two ships navigating our way through a stormy sea of familial expectations, and I couldn't help but feel hope blooming between us like wildflowers through a crack in the pavement. As the night unfolded, we exchanged glances and quiet smiles, little reminders that we had each other's backs. I still wasn't sure what the future held for us or how our relationship with Jessica would settle, but I knew that we'd face it side by side. I felt that old familiar warmth during the highs and gathered strength through the lows, knowing I could lean on him. Whatever we faced next, it was no longer just about a wedding, it was about us, and we were determined to weather the storm together. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like a slow unraveling of both my anxiety and a tightening embrace of hope. Andy and I spent countless evenings discussing how to approach Jessica and her family, who traditionally wreathed their gatherings in an air of perfection. I often found myself lost in thought, worrying about every possible scenario. Would they even accept our presence after everything? Would he apologize and then be surprised by my hesitance? Nearly every night, I'd stare at the stars outside our window, trying to find answers in their distant flickers. Despite all the chaos, we managed to carve out moments of sheer joy amid the uncertainty. One Saturday, we decided to go on an impromptu hike, a little trail leading to a view we'd stumbled upon during one of our earlier adventures. There, on that sun-drenched mountaintop, it felt like our worries didn't matter quite as much. We laughed as we recounted the time we got lost for hours during a camping trip. He grinned, the way he always did when he was being playful, and nudged me, reminding me he would always choose me over getting lost, even if it meant wandering off the path sometimes. "Together, right?" he asked, a spark of purpose filling his gaze. "Always," I assured him, even as my heart fluttered with the weight of the journey ahead. When the wedding weekend finally arrived, anxiety slithered back into my mind, weaving itself around my thoughts like a vine. I spent the morning getting ready, choosing a dress that felt right, not too elaborate, just enough to reflect my genuine self. In the mirror, I didn't quite recognize the woman looking back at me. She seemed so resolute yet fragile, a juxtaposition that mirrored the entire situation at hand. I felt the gravel of apprehension in my throat as we made our way to the venue, Andy's hand warm in mine, grounding me amidst my swirling thoughts. As we stepped into the extravagant hall filled with laughter and happiness, I could feel the tension coiling tight within me. Andy and I exchanged small talk about the decorations, the floral arrangements bursting with color that made everything feel vibrant, yet every cheerful sound felt like it was humming with an undercurrent of dread. We shared a few awkward smiles with family members who seemed blissfully unaware of the backstory. And there was Jessica, radiant and graceful, a fairy tale figure enveloped in a gown. My heart softened for a split second, until reality nudged me back awake. It was still a wedding marred by complexities. Before long, Jessica caught sight of us. Her expression shifted, and for just a heartbeat, I saw the flicker of worry dance across her features. But she turned her head away quickly, adjusting her attention to a friend beside her. My heart sank for both of us. She had a lot on her mind, and I knew our past might become an unwanted guest at this celebration. I glanced at Andy, who was watching me closely, and I decided to breathe through the moment. "We'll be okay, right?" I whispered, even though I was unsure myself. He nodded, determination lighting up his eyes, as if to say that we were in this together despite the storm brewing around us. As the night unfolded, we shared glances, laughter, and moments that made me realize how deeply we were connected. Our table found itself surrounded by family that was surprisingly warm and welcoming. A cousin of ours asked about how we'd been, easing me back into comfortable conversation. I felt a smile tugging at my lips as I recalled our recent adventures, the way Andy rolled his eyes good-naturedly when I dragged him to yet another gallery exhibit. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, Jessica lingered like the ghost of unspoken words. Then it happened. Midway through dinner, Andy excused himself to head to the restroom. I hadn't meant to, but my eyes sought out Jessica across the room, and to my surprise, she was looking at me. Caught in that moment, I felt something shift, something different from before. No anger, just a curiously soft vulnerability. Perhaps we could bridge this gap. With hesitant steps, I made my way through the crowd, threading between joyful laughter and sweet reminiscences. "Jessica," I said softly when I finally stood in front of her, "can we talk?" Her smile faltered for an instant, but she nodded, the two of us moving away from the merriment. I could sense the weight of this moment, how years of tension coiled around us, waiting for an opening. "I didn't expect you guys to come," she said, the warmth in her tone stripped back, revealing an edge of something I couldn't quite identify. Did she feel trapped by our past? "Yeah, well, neither did we," I admitted, a nervous laugh slipping out. "But here we are. Together." The honesty in my voice felt like a lifeline thrown across treacherous waters. It's not that I don't care about you both. It's complicated," she murmured, her eyes locking onto mine, vulnerability spilling out in waves. We stood there for a moment surrounded by distant laughter, two estranged sisters-in-law searching for a thread of connection amidst a tapestry of family history. In those seconds, I realized that this was the start, not just for her, but for us. It wasn't about solving everything in a single conversation. It was about acknowledging our shared past, our painful scars, and learning to move forward, slowly but surely. No matter how clumsy it felt, we could try. "Complicated is okay," I said, almost surprised by my own words. "What's important is what we choose to do next." For a moment, it was just silence between us, more welcoming than an embrace. And as she nodded, I felt a cautious yet promising warmth begin to bloom in that space, like the first signs of spring pushing their way through a winter-frosted earth. Whatever happened next would be fraught with challenges, but Andy and I had already navigated this intricate path. All we needed was faith in the footsteps ahead of us. And in that warm ambience enveloped by festivity, I believed we might just find our way towards healing together. There's a certain thrill that comes from the idea of having a carefree night in a wildly adventurous setting, free from the judgments of the everyday world, and I had always fantasized about what it would be like to be caught in a whirlwind romance with a stranger in an exotic locale. That thought lingered in the back of my mind for years, stoked by the countless movies I consumed and the endless stories floating through my social circles. But when I finally found the courage to act on one of my fantasies, I discovered the harsh realities lurking just beneath the surface. It all started when I moved to a new city after college, where everything felt fresh and full of promise. I had just landed a new job that required frequent travel, mostly to glamorous destinations, and one night in Barcelona, after a long day of meetings, I decided to embrace the moment. The warm night air was alive with music and laughter, and I was drawn into a crowded bar pulsating with energy. There, I met him, a charismatic artist with a mischievous glint in his eye and an accent that made my knees weak. He was everything my fantasies had promised, charming, spontaneous, and utterly intoxicating. We danced under the low lights, sharing stories that wove our lives together while the world faded around us. I felt alive for the first time in ages, intoxicated not just by the sangria but by the possibility that I was shedding my mundane reality for something vibrant and exhilarating. As the night deepened, he leaned in closer, whispering promises of adventure and intimacy. I could feel the tension sparking between us, a magnetic pull that made my heart race. Finally, in a haze of desire, we left the bar together, stumbling through dimly lit streets towards the nearest hotel, our laughter echoing off the cobblestones. But as the dawn broke over the city, the fantasy began to unravel. The morning light highlighted the disarray of my choice, and the artist wasn't the smooth romantic I'd pictured. His carefree facade slipped as he started talking about his commitments, his art, and his struggles with mental health. I felt the heavy weight of reality settle over us like a thick fog. Instead of a wild escape, I found myself in a deep discussion that made me acutely aware of the fragility of our encounter. I wanted to run, but there was compassion bubbling within me, urging me to listen and be present, and I struggled with the genuine connection contrasting starkly with the idealized moment I'd envisioned. I felt a rush of panic as I realized that this whirlwind had become a wave threatening to drown me. I was falling for the man behind the fantasy, not just the figure in my dreams, and as we talked, I was faced with the choice of whether to embrace this new reality or cling to the illusion of a carefree evening. Ultimately, I chose connection over escapism. We shared our fears, dreams, and vulnerabilities, and while we parted ways at noon, exchanging hesitant smiles and promises to keep in touch, I was left contemplating the nature of my fantasy and the truth we often overlook. Reflecting on that night, I realized that sometimes fantasies are not merely about pleasure or thrill, they can reveal deeper truths about ourselves, our yearnings for connection, understanding, and shared experience. I returned home feeling both liberated and unsettled, admiring how life rarely unfolds according to our plans. I don't think I'll ever forget him or the raw authenticity of our meeting. A few months later, I received a message from him, a simple "How are you?" followed by a photo of a new painting he'd created, something he claimed was inspired by our conversation. I smiled, knowing that the reality was so much richer than the fantasy, and wondered how many others were out there, living in the shadows of their own dreams. As I reflected on that night, I felt a sense of warmth, realizing that it wasn't a nightmare but a beautiful awakening, one that taught me to cherish the imperfections that make life so compelling. The days turned into weeks, and our exchanges evolved into something more profound. Each message from him felt like a gentle ripple in the still waters of my life, nudging me awake from the humdrum routine I had settled into. We shared fragments of our worlds, documenting every laugh, every desire, and every brush of vulnerability that came alive in our conversations. I began to look forward to our nightly chats, my heart dancing at the thought of unveiling the layers of his mind, and I started weaving him into my dreams. The reality was intoxicating, contrasting sharply with the fantasies I had once indulged in, where everything was steamy and perfect, a performance crafted to delight. This was different, it was raw and authentic, filled with the potential for connection and depth rather than mere physical encounters. There was a kind of magic in the imperfections that crept into our exchanges, like when I stumbled over my words, or he shared a painting that seemed incomplete, an echo of whispers and lines that spoke loudly, but lacked the finish and polish I had envisioned. One evening, during one of our lengthy dialogues, I felt the urge to broach the subject of reality. I wanted to tread carefully, though, knowing how easily dreams can shatter under the weight of expectations. "What do you think about exploring our fantasies further?" I typed, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit send, the question hanging in the digital air between us like a conversation held at a cafe, the scent of coffee and pastries wafting around us. I braced myself. Would he take it as a playful suggestion, or would he see it for what it was, a gentle nudge toward the frayed edges of reality? His reply came quicker than I anticipated, a simple "I've thought about it too. But part of me fears losing what we have." Those words echoed in my mind for days. We were treading on a precipice, hovering between the perfect fantasy we had built and the genuine connection that was blossoming. Part of me wanted to dive headfirst into the chaos of it all, to explore every nuance of our desires, to drunk press those fantasies into reality. But another part of me clung desperately to the warmth and safety of our words. What if the tangibility of our dreams bled the colors out of what was already vivid? The notion of it being a nightmare replayed in my thoughts. It was so easy to dance around the idea of passion when it was wrapped tightly in the cocoon of screens and distance. But what if when stripped bare, the reality fell flat, an unfinished painting revealed under the hard light of day? Eventually, after scribbling tentative messages in my mind, I took a deep breath and pressed forward. "What do you want to see happen?" The question was a leap into the unknown, and I felt lighter yet heavier with the weight of it. I wondered if I caught a hint of hesitation in his response, a flicker of uncertainty that made my heart race and pulse thud against my chest. "I want to get to know the real you, beyond the words," he wrote, and I felt an overwhelming warmth spread within me, a craving that stretched beyond mere physicality. Weeks passed, our dialogues traversed the spectrum of feelings, ranging from innocent musings on artistic inspiration to deep dives into the intricacies of commitment. We lost ourselves in stories of past loves, future dreams, and those midnight confessions that spilled out like secrets beneath the stars. Yet, I sensed a contention hanging over us, a question we were avoiding. I could almost hear it, that whisper of destiny. What would it mean to turn this cartoonish dream of skinny dipping in a warm ocean into a picturesque illusion? And then, one rainy evening in late autumn, a soft invitation came nudging into my inbox. "How about meeting in person?" The proposition shimmered before me like the glow of an uncertain flame, and I found myself grinning, then quickly frowning. My heart raced, anticipation clawing at my insides. Could I step into the canvas we'd painted together, or was that the moment when everything would dissolve? I could almost see it, the fantasy stretching out like a beautiful, uncharted horizon before me, pulling me in, while simultaneously pushing me away with the heavy weight of reality. Days of contemplation curled around me like smoke, each twist and turn of thought compelling me onward until I had crafted a response that both terrified and thrilled me. Yes. It hung in my mind like a fragile spell, one word laden with promise and dread. We settled on a small art gallery nestled on the quiet outskirts of town, a space drenched in creative energy, where the paintings were lively, and the atmosphere felt ethereal, scattering the lingering doubts like scattered leaves in the wind. The day of our meeting arrived, and 1,000 butterflies danced in my stomach as I entered the gallery, the smell of fresh paint mingling with the smells of rain and warming spices. The initial thrill fluttering in my chest was marred with a thick layer of apprehension. Would we get lost in each other's eyes, or was I stepping into an awkward situation destined to slip back into the shadows? But then I saw him, standing just beneath a sprawling canvas, blue in swirls of deeper hues that echoed the depths of my mind. Our eyes met, and the world faded into a quiet hum. The moment was surreal, bursting with an intensity I had not anticipated. We spent those hours enveloped in conversation, laughter echoing in the small space. I shared thoughts on art, he chuckled at my nervous stumbles, and for every word we exchanged, I felt the invisible thread tying us draw tighter. We painted a new story together, one that was only beginning to emerge from the canvas of our dreams, no longer constrained by the pixels that had connected us. When our hands brushed, I felt warm currents of electricity. It was clear that we were both aware of the tightrope we walked above an abyss of uncertainty, but the magic of the moment kept us tethered. As the evening wound down and twilight seeped into the gallery, we stepped outside, the world outside appearing softer, illuminated under the gentle glow of street lamps. A wave of real, tangible affection washed over me, fueling the moment with a quiet, electrifying promise. There was no fantasy tearing at the seams, no crumbling reality demanding attention. Just two people taking a chance, creating a story marked not by the typical markers of romance or lust, but by the foundations of honesty and friendship. Months later, I lay in bed, replaying the memories of his laughter and our first meaningful kiss, still enveloped in the sweetness of that night. What could have easily devolved into a nightmare instead turned into the core of a thriving journey, one that transformed our shared dreams into a fragile reality, delicate yet beautiful. With every shared moment and vulnerability, we crafted a version of ourselves that was, and always would be, infinitely richer than anything I had found before, reminding me that sometimes it's the unpredictable chaos of life that blooms into the kind of connection we often yearn for in our fantasies. And as I drifted off to sleep, I allowed the bittersweet wonder of it all to embrace me. In the quiet chambers of my mind, shadows of the past faded, replaced with the whispers of dreams yet to be realized, knowing fully that those fantasies, when touched by honesty, could morph into something stunningly, satisfyingly real. That night marked a turning point in my life, each thought spiraling gracefully into the next as I imagined the small changes I could embrace. I often found myself daydreaming about our conversation, the flow of ideas, the laughter interwoven with vulnerability. It became a tapestry of emotions that I would revisit on quiet evenings when the world outside dimmed into a soft glow. I replayed his words, the way he spoke about art and humanity. Folding my own little insecurities into the fabric of our connection, feeling a sense of permission to embrace my chaotic self. Days turned into weeks, and it astonished me how something so serendipitous could linger like the taste of a fine wine, warm and intoxicating. Every text he sent painted another layer in my mind, a canvas I didn't know I had, each exchange revealing the raw essence of two souls entangled in shared dreams. I began to see my life differently. Instead of the linear paths I had always walked, I found myself wandering into serendipitous alleys of adventure and self-discovery. Then, one evening, as rain drizzled softly against my window panes, my phone buzzed with a familiar rhythm. It was him again, this time asking if I'd like to see his latest exhibit, a showcase he had planned for months in a quaint gallery downtown. My heart raced at the thought. Compared to the previous vague illusions of intimacy through our screens, this was a real-world challenge, a shift from fantasy to reality, a chance to interact beyond the confines of our carefully curated words. I hesitated, nervous about stepping out of my comfort zone. What if we encountered the rawness of existence that often lay beyond the realm of our beautiful exchanges? What if it didn't measure up, shattering the soft cocoon we had spun around each other? But the allure of authenticity won the battle within, and I found myself standing before the gallery a few days later, curiosity blooming inside me as I entered the softly lit space. Colors danced on the walls, each painting embodying a story I hadn't lived, but could feel resonating deep within my heart. And there he was, standing proud amidst his canvases, a mix of nervousness and passion radiating from him like a beacon. Our eyes locked, and in that instant, the world around us faded. It was just the two of us, our connection flourishing amidst the strokes of paint and splashes of color. As we navigated through his works, he explained the inspiration behind each piece, his passion electric. I shared my thoughts too, hesitant but emboldened by the beauty around us and the contrast of our conversations that had now grown into something palpable. Yet, amidst the joy of discovery, I noticed a peculiar unease creeping in, a recognition of the thin line we were treading between fantasy and our very real lives. Suddenly, the idealistic images I had conjured up began to waver, revealing the intricacies of human connection that were not always as simple as they appeared in my dreams. It happened during a soft, spontaneous laugh shared over one of his more abstract pieces, which to me seemed chaotic and whimsical, yet to him symbolized the emotional wreckage of lost love and anger. In that moment, the laughter curdled slightly, revealing glimpses of his real-world complexity. As he bore his soul, shadows flickered in his eyes, hints of struggles and disappointments that his art had masked until now. The fantasy I had wrapped around him of the flawless artist who could lead me into a world painted with sunshine, began to reveal a semblance of darkness that mirrored my own. Feeling a rush of vulnerability, I opened up too, speaking of my own tribulations, the tightrope of expectations holding me hostage in my own life. As the evening unfolded, the layers of our conversations peeled back, leaving room for honesty but also a sense of hesitance, an unsteady dance of vulnerability that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Our connection deepened that night but was underscored by the ever-present reminder of our fears and insecurities, that perhaps the very beauty we sought was intertwined with the truths we often shied away from. And finally, as we exited the gallery, the gentle rain had morphed into a light drizzle, cascading down like whispered confessions. Walking side by side without a clear destination, I realized it was okay to embrace the unknown, finding solace in the warmth of his presence. The night felt alive, charged with the potential for shared dreams but also the weight of reality pressing down on us. As we reached a quiet park, the moonlight spilled across the grass, illuminating a space where we could stand still for a moment, allowing the hum of the city to fade into the background. I turned to look at him, and in the silent exchange, I understood. The beauty of our connection was not in the idealized fantasies we had conjured, but in the intricacies, the messiness of our truths intertwined. This wasn't a neatly wrapped story, it was still unfolding, an exquisite blend of highs and lows living in the breath between our words. As I lay in bed that night, the echoes of our conversation lingered, a tapestry woven from threads of joy, fear, longing, and relief. No longer was I drifting off to sleep solely wrapped in thoughts of unrealized fantasies. Instead, I was cradled by the promise of an authentic journey ahead, one where nightmares didn't hold dominion over my dreams. In that acceptance, amidst the cacophony of life's beautiful chaos, I felt free. The stars outside shone brightly, as if nodding along to my revelations, and I surrendered to sleep, secure in the knowledge that every moment was a brushstroke on the canvas of my life, exactly as it was meant to be.